The towering Great Ortigo Castle, standing amidst the pitch-black darkness, is known as the Haunted Castle. This place became saturated with ominous demonic energy as a result of the long war against monsters, to the point where sunlight was completely blocked out, causing it to constantly exude a gloomy and desolate atmosphere. No one inhabited that castle except for the members of the Ortigo lineage, who were not only immune to this demonic energy but also possessed powerful supernatural abilities. In the midst of this terrifying place, the youngest daughter of the Ortigo family, Eri, finally arrived after a grueling journey, standing alone before its massive gate. The hero child, by whose hands the salvation of this place would be written, had arrived. The story of her return to the north began just 1 week ago, specifically in the fiefdom of Marchioness Melissa, located in the south. There, Marchioness Melissa, Eri's maternal grandmother, was weeping bitterly over her poor child. Eri Ortigo, the youngest lady of the Ortigo family, was lying in her bed appearing gravely ill, calling out to her grandmother in a weak voice. Expressing deep concern, the grandmother said her granddaughter had become nothing but skin and bones, while the child tried to reassure her that she was fine. In a state of panic, the Marchioness summoned the doctor, wondering if her child had contracted a terminal illness as she was suffering from a fever and had lost a lot of weight. However, after some hesitation, the doctor explained that the young lady was simply suffering from overeating, as the child was asleep with a visibly bloated stomach. The Marchioness was infuriated by this diagnosis, insisting that her child had only eaten 10 turkey legs for lunch and was practically starving, pointing to her cheeks, which she claimed were sunken, while the doctor calmly tried to explain that most children couldn't even finish a single leg. Then, with increasing worry, the grandmother added that on an ordinary afternoon, her granddaughter had started hearing strange voices since yesterday. When the doctor inquired about the nature of these voices, she revealed that they were calling the name Eri and describing her as the purifier who will save the world, which the child confirmed to her grandmother and the doctor. The voice completed its mysterious message, explaining that it would reveal the past and the future to those living in the present, urging them to discover everything to save the world, which left the child in a state of shock and confusion. Because of this mysterious voice, Eri, who had been living a happy life with her grandmother, began to recall memories of something called a previous life. In that life, she was a 9-year-old girl named Lee Erin living in South Korea, and she was a child who loved justice. After the death of her grandmother who cared for her, she moved to live in an orphanage. In one of her memories, she saw an older boy trying to take candy from a younger child. Lee Erin bravely intervened and kicked the bullying boy, scolding him for his lack of ethics as a martial artist, especially since he was wearing a yellow belt. As a black belt holder in Taekwondo and the youngest leader of a demonstration team recognized by the master, she was proud of her strength. She was a wonderful child who defeated villains and defended the weak, and the small child thanked her for saving him. One day, she found a strange novel that her teacher at the orphanage, Lee Erin, was fond of, and decided to read it out of curiosity. The title of the novel was The Savage Snow Family of the North. The story tells the tale of Eri, the youngest daughter of a villainous family living in the far north, who lost her mother due to the demonic energy that swept through the entire region. As a result, the girl was sent to live with her mother's relatives in the south, but she was hiding a great secret. Eri was actually the only purifier capable of healing the evil energy, and anyone she touched would be completely freed from this demonic influence. But the tragedy was that no one, including Eri herself, was aware of this fact. As time passed, the demonic energy began crawling from the north to invade the south. Due to the corruption of this evil force, the city residents, the servants, and even Marchioness Melissa, who loved Eri dearly, as well as Eri herself, all perished, and the world was destroyed. While reading, Lee Erin realized that what she held in her hands was not just a story, but a future that would soon come true. A mysterious voice told her that this tale would remain her guide, while the child was waking up in her bed. When she awoke, she found her grandmother beside her, anxiously asking if she had woken up, explaining that she had been unconscious for 10 full minutes. Although the doctor insisted she had only dozed off for moments and her breathing was stable, the grandmother rejected this talk, calling it nonsense. The grandmother continued to express excessive worry, claiming her child looked like a dry twig, and ordered her to get up and drink 10 liters of milk immediately, much to the child's surprise. Eri sat in her bed wondering if it was all just a dream, but she soon realized she was indeed the 9-year-old Lee Erin, and that Eri was the girl from the novel her teacher used to read. Then, a great shock hit her upon realizing she had become Eri Ortigo herself. She remembered the words of her grandmother and the doctor in the dream, and how they described her as the only purifier in this world. That dream was so vivid it made her realize one important and painful truth, that this world was destined for destruction. This meant that she and her grandmother were destined to die. The child sat at the dining table trying to calm herself and overcome her fear. She decided that she was no longer that 5-year-old child who followed her grandmother everywhere. Rather, she was now a 9-year-old former martial artist. She fondly recalled everything her grandmother had done for her, from the snacks she made herself to the warm clothes she knitted for her. She knew her grandmother loved her very much and wanted to live happily with her for a very long time. Therefore, she told her grandmother that she believed she was the hero who would save the world, and that as the purifier, she must do so. The grandmother laughed at her granddaughter's words, considering it a childish wish to become a hero, and encouraged her to eat more meat to grow taller. But Eri desperately tried to convince her. She was truly serious. When she realized her grandmother wouldn't believe her, she declared with determination that she couldn't stay like this, and that she would become a hero and go to the north. The grandmother tenderly tried to dissuade her from her decision, reminding her that the north was a very dangerous place for a little girl like her, and offered her soybean powder cakes as a reward if she promised not to go. Even though these cakes were her favorite snack, Eri almost gave in to her grandmother's temptation, but she held herself together at the last moment. She clung to her decision, asserting that cakes were not important now, and that she had to go to the north to save the world. The grandmother changed her approach, sadly wondering why her granddaughter insisted on going to the north, and warned her that if she went, she wouldn't be able to see her grandmother again. Eri hesitated for a moment, but she remembered what she had read in the novel about her grandmother's weakness against demonic energy, meaning she couldn't accompany her to the north, and they likely wouldn't be able to see each other for a while. She reassured her grandmother that this was necessary and something heroes must do, and that brave heroes do not travel with their grandmothers. Finally, the grandmother gave in, reluctantly agreeing for her to go for just one day. And when Eri objected that saving the world required more time, the grandmother extended the period to 1 week and no more. At that moment, the grandmother remembered her daughter's final words. When she advised her not to forget something regarding Eri, she wondered to herself why her little granddaughter's words sounded exactly like her daughter's last words, and she tenderly patted the child's head while feeling extremely worried about her. Thus, Eri finally received permission to visit the north. The question remains whether she will be able to eliminate the demonic energy in the north and save the world. After her arrival, Eri introduced herself as Eri Ortigo, who had finally come to the north to save the world. But what she found in the castle was a scene of chaos, with servants running everywhere shouting orders to wrap something tightly to prevent the foul smell from leaking, and to bring all the magical tools, while she sat alone wrapped in heavy clothes. The servants expressed great admiration for the child, remarking on how wonderful she was, while she was puzzled, wondering what was going on around her. The Grand Duchy of Ortigo is situated in the middle of the Northern Plague, which is why only the lineage with strong abilities could withstand and endure its atmosphere. These gifted children were allowed to stay in the Grand Duke's castle, where they enjoyed many privileges. However, there was one problem. These children caused massive chaos, running around and tampering with the castle's precious belongings, smashing things without regard for danger. They were a group of spoiled delinquents who lived only for their own amusement. The children of this place were supposed to be violent and uncontrollable, like little monsters, or at least, that was how the situation was thought to be. But suddenly, in the presence of the knights, the servants announced an unexpected event. The youngest lady of the family had arrived. The child bowed politely and offered her greetings, then stood with dignity. She introduced herself with a bright smile, explaining that her name was Eri Ortigo and that she was 5 years old. But the welcome she received from the children of the north was a collective shouting demanding her to leave, which seemed to be their usual greeting. The servants were stunned by her polite behavior. She was a child, introducing herself courteously, contrary to what they had heard, as they believed she lived in the south because she was not immune to the plague. One of the servants asked why she had come and if she had come alone, so the child answered with enthusiasm and joy that she had come alone, flying using magic. Then she asked to meet the head of the family, so the servant told her that the Grand Duke was currently busy dealing with a problem related to monsters. The child showed signs of disappointment at his absence, leading the servants to expect she would start crying and have a tantrum like the other children. But she surprised them again by saying calmly that it was okay, and that she would simply wait, a reaction no one expected. Then she gave a full bow and politely asked them to take care of her from now on. With her shining silver hair that had nothing to do with the north, her delicate voice, her exquisite manners, and her smile as bright as the sun. She looked like an angel, a new and dazzling kind of human never seen before in the north. The servants could not help their overwhelming admiration, wondering how she could be so small and cute, describing her as the little cute beauty. But soon she found herself wearing a bloated outfit resembling a dumpling, and she began to wonder why she was forced to wear it, demanding it be taken off. The head maid of Grand Duke Ortigo's castle apologized, explaining that her request was difficult to fulfill. The child wondered in distress why she was the only one wearing this outfit, and it occurred to her that she might be getting bullied and ostracized since her first day. She shouted that bullying was bad behavior, but the head maid explained it had nothing to do with that. Since she was not immune, there was no other choice. Then the head maid asked her if she had seen the black fog surrounding the castle, stating that this plague is particularly harmful to the minds of children. For this reason, non-immune people like her must wear a protective suit against the plague. Eri finally realized the situation. Because she lacked immunity, she had to wear this outfit, and she also had to return after only 1 week. She understood the matter, then told the servants she was fine and they could leave. The servants left feeling pity for her, wishing her strength and rest after her long and grueling journey. The child sat alone in her room, but she soon encouraged herself, saying that a great hero cannot be discouraged by something like this. She considered the outfit she was wearing a symbol of strength, and that true heroes do not care about trivial matters. As soon as she made sure no one was around, she decided to take something out. She pulled out a list written in childish handwriting titled Eri's Goals, which included, first, saving the world with her purifying power. Second, getting rid of all the plague in the north by touching it. And third, eating delicious food with her grandmother as a happy ending. After setting her plan, she immediately felt nostalgic for her grandmother. She realized that this was the first time she would sleep alone without her grandmother beside her. Nevertheless, she reassured herself that everything was fine, as she had succeeded in reaching the north as a first step. Her next step was to meet the Grand Duke, reveal her identity as a hero, and ask for his help. She was a brave hero, so she was determined to save everyone no matter what. At that moment, on the northern front line against the monsters, there was a warrior fighting fiercely. Suddenly, one of his men called out to him with the title, Your Highness Grand Duke, and told him they had received a message from the castle. The message carried news of the arrival of the young lady Eri in the north. The Grand Duke wondered in surprise if his daughter had indeed come to the north. His assistant inquired if he should return quickly, and he told him that the young lady Eri was preparing to request a meeting with him, and that this was wonderful news. But the Duke wondered to himself why his daughter had returned to this dying land, something the other man could not answer. Coldly, the Duke ordered to tell her to go back, and swore that he would never meet that child. The north is covered in thick, dark demonic energy, and as a result of years of fighting monsters, that powerful energy had accumulated within the body of Declan, the Duke. Any ordinary person would have lost control and died long ago, but he endured with his immense power until he reached a state of level 5 erosion, making him an entity akin to the demonic energy itself. Even those with immunity find it difficult to approach him, let alone a child who has no immunity at all. Facing him would mean her death in an instant. Therefore, the Duke decided to stay where he was, as he always did, and that child would live happily in the south, as if they never existed in each other's lives. He believed this was the best choice. Then he ordered his men to deliver a message to the castle stating that he would continue to subdue the monsters for the time being. Thus, he decided to remain ignorant of everything about her, how much she had grown, what she looked like now, and all that he would never know. But his plans faltered due to a sudden event at the castle, where Eri rushed toward one of the maids screaming that a disaster had struck. The day after her arrival, Eri noticed a faint fog flickering around some of the maids. But despite her attempt to touch the hand of the maid, surrounded by the demonic fog, the fog continued to appear, which greatly puzzled her, as the novel she read confirmed the energy would be purified as soon as she touched it. Eri apologized to the maid for suddenly grabbing her hand and asked if she felt anything coming from her hand, but all the maid felt was how cute, small, and wonderful the young lady was. While the maid was immersed in her admiration for the child, Eri noticed the fog was still there and began to wonder about the truth of being a purifier, as she was told. Her confidence shattered at that moment, as she had thought she would easily be able to purify the demonic energy as soon as she arrived in the north. She burst into tears, screaming and wondering if everything she knew about her ability was incorrect. To make matters worse, the head maid came to her with the news that the Duke would not return during the week, but he ordered all comforts be provided for her and suggested she rest well before her departure. Despair hit her as she thought about whether she had to sleep here for 6 nights and then simply return, without meeting the Duke and without being able to purify anything. This meant one terrifying result, that everyone would die, and the world would end. She refused to surrender to this end and decided to find a way out of this predicament. She began to think about what a hero would do in such a situation and remembered her favorite cartoon hero from her previous life, Regent, the hero of justice. In his story, when the defeated villain asked him about the secret of his superhuman strength, Regent replied that his strength was different from the villain's strength. He revealed to him that the reason for his strength was that he was always accompanied by his dear friends. This idea lit up her mind. Heroes always have other hero friends to help them. With a sly smile, she decided she would summon one too. She decided to search for a very strong friend sleeping in this place, referring to an old and powerful tree. On her way, she met a manservant and a maid, where one of them called her Little Round One. The servant wondered where she was going at this late hour, thinking she couldn't sleep, and offered that the strong ones play something fun with her. But she told them with a bright smile that she had something to say, which was that she wanted to take a walk in the castle garden now. The two servants were surprised by her request so late, but she persisted gently, apologizing for bothering them since they were busy and insisting she really wanted to see the garden. Faced with her polite request, the two servants couldn't refuse and agreed immediately. She was overjoyed, and they walked together toward the garden. Things went exactly as she had planned. She had realized one thing after coming to the castle. If you treat the workers here politely, they get confused and do what you ask of them. She had discovered their weakness. Now that she had reached the garden, all she had to do was find that tree she was looking for. Thinking it might be difficult in a large garden, when they announced their arrival at the garden, she was surprised to find it immediately, because there was only one tree in the entire garden. The servants confirmed it was indeed the only living tree left in the place. Then they offered to walk around to see the other side of the garden, which left her puzzled. Ari's eyes lit up with a brilliant idea. She suggested to the servants that they play hide and seek and offered to count by the tree while they hide. The servants welcomed the idea, and she began to count. While she was counting, the two servants hurried to hide, and she, in turn, took the opportunity to sigh in relief and then rushed toward the tree to summon her friend before they returned. That tree was the Ortigo family's beech tree, and according to the novel, if someone summons a familiar friend here, they can form a contract with them. She raised her voice in prayer, pleading for the great Ortigo familiar of immense power to appear in its familiar form. But nothing happened, making her wonder if she needed to chant more spells. She started chanting any spell that came to her mind. Suddenly, she heard the servants calling her, saying they had hidden and asking why she didn't come to look for them. Out of her confusion, she began shouting all the spells she knew from different stories, then called out loudly pleading for her friend to come out. Suddenly, a dark entity appeared from the tree and asked her in a deep voice if she had found him, declaring himself as the great familiar of the house of Ortigo. He added that he had been longing for a long time to obtain a physical form through a contract. He promised her that by completing this contract, he would appear in the form she desired, as a powerful ally who would make his master the strongest ever, which made Ari very happy, thinking her plan had finally succeeded. But at that crucial moment, she suddenly felt hungry and wished she could eat the gingerbread cookie her grandmother had given her. She tried to focus on the summoning and imagined the form of the familiar she heard was an incredibly terrifying monster. She just hoped it would appear in a cool way. The familiar announced the completion of the contract. With a resounding laugh, he finally appeared, freed from his seal. But what appeared was not a terrifying monster, but a gingerbread man, which struck Ari with a massive shock. He had a crunchy body and chocolate eyes. He looked so delicious that she couldn't help but welcome him as a new friend. The cookie man addressed her proudly, calling her the contractor who would stand by his side and gently telling her of his happiness to meet her. But suddenly the familiar was shocked when he looked at himself and screamed, wondering why his arms were so short, while Ari contemplated him in bewilderment. The familiar was enraged and wondered what form he had appeared in, accusing her of turning him into a mere cookie. But Ari innocently defended herself, insisting she had done nothing. The familiar bitterly explained that the summoned creature always manifests in the form the summoner desires, recalling his glories when the first founder of the Ortigo family summoned him, where he appeared then as the strongest dragon on Earth, which aroused Ari's extreme admiration and awe. He continued narrating his great history, saying he was later summoned by a 90-year-old sword master to manifest in the form of a phoenix that won everyone's admiration, to which Ari enthusiastically confirmed that a phoenix is very cool too. Then the familiar turned to her angrily and shouted, asking her what she had imagined for him to appear in such a ridiculous form. Ari simply answered with an innocent smile that she had been feeling hungry earlier and thus thought of her desire to eat cookies, leaving the familiar deeply shocked that hunger was the cause. The Cookie Man collapsed, weeping and wailing, mourning his tragic fate and how a fleeting moment of hunger from a child turned his great body into mere cookie crumbs. After all this chaos and strange events, Eri was finally able to return to her room only after she finished the game and found the two servants who were hiding from her in the garden. The familiar continued to sigh and regret over his new form, while Eri tried to comfort him enthusiastically, assuring him not to feel disappointed because cookies are something very wonderful. She began vibrantly listing to him how delicious cookies taste, pointing out that they become sweet if chocolate is added, and salty and delicious if salt is added. But her shining looks full of desire frightened the familiar, who retreated in fear, wondering to himself if this was true, realizing that her look at him was never normal, as if she wanted to eat him. The familiar sighed in resignation and then asked her directly for the reason that prompted her to summon him. The child answered with a bright smile and enthusiasm that the reason was clear: to save the world together. The familiar looked at her skeptically, wondering if she was truly a hero as she claimed, and asked her to tell him what she could do and if she possessed any real abilities. Eri began boasting about her skills with pride, talking about her mastery of taekwondo moves and fencing, in addition to her proficiency in various kicking techniques. She assured him she was very strong, but the familiar glanced at her with an expressionless look, lamenting in his heart about his condition. After always being an assistant to the strongest figures, he ended up as a babysitter for a small child. Eri corrected the matter, adding that she also possessed a hidden ability alongside her fighting skills. The familiar summarized her words, concluding that she didn't know how to use her ability at the moment. She confirmed this to him, explaining she read in a book telling the story of this world that she is the purifier who will save it, but she is completely ignorant of how to use this ability in purification. The familiar thought for a bit and then suggested they first check her stats and abilities. The child was amazed at his ability to do that, so the familiar replied proudly that his basic ability is to be the assistant who helps his contractor grow to become the strongest. Then he immediately began checking Eri Ortigo's stats. As soon as the status screen for the purification power appeared, the familiar was shocked and screamed in astonishment, which raised Eri's concern as she asked him fearfully what was happening. The familiar told her, surprised, that her purification power was so tiny it barely equaled the size of a bean, insisting he had never seen anything like it before, which caused the child great disappointment. Then he explained to her that purification power doesn't increase with regular training, but one relies on the power they were born with. However, he suggested they start developing it from now on in another way. He began explaining the levels of purification power to her, clarifying that they are divided into 5 stages. The first star is the Seed of Light, the second, the Tree of Light, the third, the Shield of Light, the fourth, the Holy Light, and the fifth is the Light of Salvation. He added that the lower the level, the weaker the demonic energy that can be purified, shocking her that she doesn't just fall within the first star level, but she is at the very bottom of it, meaning she is at the absolute base, which made Eri sit on the ground in a state of despair. While the child was trembling from shock and disbelief, the familiar suddenly noticed something strange and asked her to wait because he saw something else inside her. Eri asked him desperately if it was just another thing the size of a bean, but he interrupted her enthusiastically, insisting that this thing was truly amazing. He told her that there was a glowing purification ring inside her body that absorbs demonic energy. The child asked curiously about the nature of this ring. The familiar explained to her that if she absorbs demonic energy just as she eats cookies, her purification power would gradually increase to become stronger, stating that she is now at the first star level. For this reason, she can only purify people infected with weak demonic energy currently. But if she continues purifying, she might become the strongest purifier with a 5-star level in the world. He added that the purification ring technique differs from others as it requires her to approach the target to absorb their energy. But the great advantage is that anyone she purifies will never be infected by demonic energy again. Eri was amazed by this discovery, and the familiar confirmed to her how wonderful it was for her to possess such an amazing ability. The child then realized that she was indeed a true hero and regained her self-confidence, declaring she was truly the hero who would save the world. The familiar laughed enthusiastically, declaring that as her special summoned being, he would help her grow and develop from now on. Eri celebrated enthusiastically with her familiar friend, vowing to save the world together. Thus, the two took their first great step toward achieving this goal inside that desolate castle. The next morning, the child walked through the castle corridors with her friend sitting on her shoulder, discussing their plan, which required meeting the Grand Duke first, to tell him she is the hero and ask him to allow her to stay longer in the north. She called this plan Operation Stay in the North, which gained the familiar's approval, but she soon wondered in confusion how to meet the Duke when he was absent from the castle. Meanwhile, the familiar drew her attention to someone coming. The man gave a polite greeting, introducing himself as the butler, Peter. Ari contemplated him while thinking about his prestige as an adult and wondered if she could benefit from him in some way. So she approached him with curiosity and asked what document he was carrying. Peter explained it was a document summarizing the rules and regulations of the castle. A phrase in the document stating the necessity of all forces returning immediately in case of an emergency caught her attention, so she inquired about its meaning. The butler took her to watch a morning gathering of knights in the courtyard from one of the balconies. There, she listened to one of the knights emphasizing the necessity of informing the Grand Duke immediately using a messenger falcon if any emergency occurred within the castle. Ari echoed the idea in her mind and began to understand the mechanism. Suddenly, she recalled a memory from her previous life as Lee Aaron, when her taekwondo coach scolded her for secretly eating snacks, making her realize that adults always discover everything children do. She concluded from this that when a child causes a problem, adults inevitably appear, meaning that her causing a problem would force the Grand Duke to return to the castle. She explained her conclusion to the familiar, justifying it by saying that although this behavior is wrong for good children, achieving a higher goal requires making some small sacrifices, leaving him in a state of confusion. Then she enthusiastically announced the start of Operation Cause a Huge Incident. The scene shifted to show butler Peter sitting in the room, sighing in despair, and beside him a small boy weeping bitterly, indicating that a big problem had occurred. The events returned to about 2 hours earlier, where Ari was wandering cautiously in the cold vicinity of the castle. The familiar reminded her of the need to create a massive chaos sufficient to grab the Grand Duke's attention, so she agreed and emphasized the need to find the perfect place to cause this problem. 2 maids accompanied her on her tour and asked her anxiously if she was sure she wanted to explore this haunted castle, to which she answered with great enthusiasm. The 2 maids tried to warn her of the scary things and strange monsters that might suddenly appear in the castle, but Ari showed no fear. Rather, she looked in awe at skulls floating in the air as if it were raining them, while the 2 maids were trembling with terror. The maids suggested moving to another place, considering that this gloomy and dark castle did not suit the young lady's bright personality. They added that the place lacked fun, let alone its extreme cold due to the absence of the warm southern sun. But Ari smiled happily, asserting she felt warm and was even sweating, and that wandering around was very enjoyable. The 2 maids looked at her with great admiration, feeling the gloomy castle had lit up with her presence, while she continued searching in her mind for a target for her mischief, until her eyes fell on a massive building and she wondered curiously what it was. The maids pointed to a massive building in front of Ari, explaining it was the training hall where the family children received their lessons. The child wondered curiously if she could enter to see it, so the 2 maids hesitated a bit, and at that moment a bell rang announcing the end of classes. The large doors opened and children began coming out, so the maid suggested retreating and staying away, warning that staying in their way could be dangerous. Suddenly, the voice of a boy sharply demanding something caught Ari's attention, making her eyes glitter with suspicious enthusiasm, for she saw a boy cornering another against the wall, demanding he hand over all the money or items he possessed. This scene brought back to her mind a similar memory from her previous life, where a child smaller than her was being bullied and having his meal stolen, awakening her instinct to search for trouble as if she were a hyena smelling prey. Without any hesitation, she jumped forward and shouted unclear, childish words, demanding he stop, rejoicing at finally finding the perfect incident she was looking for to cause a problem. The 2 boys were surprised by her turn and asked indignantly about the identity of this annoying little girl, so Ari bravely accused the bully of bothering her friend, but the bullying boy smiled mockingly, claiming he wasn't bullying him but just collecting simple donations from him. The boy approached her, saying he hadn't seen her face before, and mockingly concluded she was from the common folk given her protective suit against the plague. While she tried to state her name to prove her identity, the boy continued belittling her, warning her to stay away before she got hurt since she had no immunity, so the 2 maids intervened sharply and ordered him to stop, revealing that the young lady belonged to the ruling Ortego lineage. The boy was shocked for a moment, while Ari looked at him firmly, describing him as a very bad boy, and asked him for his name with total challenge. The boy introduced himself arrogantly, saying his name was Schultz, a proud descendant of the side branch of the great Ortego family, explaining that he was considered a second cousin to the Grand Duke. Ari immediately concluded from his words that he was just an insignificant secondary character and gave him a look of pity while her familiar friend watched silently from her shoulder. Schultz was enraged by her condescending look and rushed toward her, trying to push her hard to order her to stay out of his way. But he was deeply surprised when the child managed to dodge his attack with skill and speed. Eri took a professional-like fighting stance, declaring that this ill-mannered boy needed a real and practical lesson in human etiquette. Schultz was confused by not understanding her unclear childish words, which he had pre-expected due to his naivety. The boy completely lost his temper and raised his hand trying to strike her, shouting angrily that she was bringing this on herself by intervening. The two maids screamed in terror, pleading with the young Master Schultz to stop being reckless. At that decisive moment, Eri recalled her taekwondo coach's teachings from her previous life, who taught her that upholding true justice sometimes requires striking with unwavering force. Accordingly, she announced her full commitment to her coach's teachings and scolded the boy for not listening to her previous warnings regarding the necessity of using manners, demanding he stop being disrespectful. In a quick and sudden move, she jumped into the air and directed a powerful kick directly to Schultz's face, knocking him to the ground with a single blow. Earlier, butler Peter was reflecting on his past as a professional and dangerous assassin before he ended up as a loyal servant to the Ortigo family. For he noticed that the castle, which had long been known for its strictness and dark, gloomy atmosphere, had recently seen a noticeable laxity in discipline, coinciding with his observation of one of the maids smiling. He realized that this sudden change was undoubtedly due to the influence of the young lady who recently arrived and wanders around freely. Although her childish appearance might deceive some, his trained eyes clearly realized she was planning something and causing trouble, concluding that she, in the end, was no different from the rest of the delinquent children living in the castle. Only moments later, his thoughts were cut off by one of the servants rushing to him in a state of panic, demanding he come quickly because a big problem had occurred between Lady Eri and the young Master Schultz. And returning to the present, Butler Peter sighed helplessly as he sat in the room with the children after the incident, thinking that his intuition was exactly right, and that she was indeed the one who caused the problem. Meanwhile, Schultz was weeping bitterly in pain and complaining to the butler that that little girl dared to hit him. So Peter quietly asked him to explain in detail and slowly what exactly happened. Schultz screamed in pain while sitting on the sofa, placing full blame on the butler for the incident that occurred. Despite Peter's internal grumbling at the boy's hasty accusations and his attempt to evade responsibility, he offered a deep apology with apparent coldness, surprised at a child's ability to speak this way. But Eri interrupted them with her innocence, defending the butler and asserting he committed no mistake and that what happened was just a quarrel between her and Schultz. Peter was totally stunned to hear a child in this castle, speaking with unprecedented rationality and taking responsibility for her actions. At that moment, Peter recalled long years of suffering with the delinquent family children who gave him a hard time. So he looked at Eri with eyes glittering with admiration, admitting to himself that throughout decades of service, he hadn't encountered a child with such noble manners. Schultz interrupted this moment rudely, shouting in Eri's face and threatening her with severe punishment when his mother came, then mocked her, demanding she bring her nobody parents. Peter was enraged by this insolence and scolded Schultz severely for daring to utter words lacking respect toward a figure of high status like her. Peter continued his stern talk, warning that insulting a lady from the Ortigo family might bring the wrath of the entire family, while Eri sat watching them calmly. Schultz froze in terror and began stuttering after realizing her true identity, while Peter increased the intensity of the situation, considering it a grave matter that almost caused her injuries. Based on Schultz's previous request to bring parents, Peter announced that the boy's mother, Viscountess Dira, would have to speak directly with the Grand Duke personally, which surprised Eri. While Schultz's soul almost left his body from the horror of the shock, Eri realized happily that her plan had indeed succeeded, and that causing problems summons the presence of parents. The child enthusiastically assumed that her causing this big problem would force the Grand Duke to come to the castle. But Peter noticed her facial expressions and began to wonder in confusion about the reason that might drive a peaceful and gentle soul like her to provoke a fight. So he wrongly concluded she deliberately stirred up trouble simply because she missed the Grand Duke and longed to see him, remembering the maid's talk about her constant inquiry about the Duke as soon as she arrived at the castle. The butler drifted into his fantasies, imagining the child weeping bitterly, longing for her father's tenderness, and felt deep guilt for not realizing how sad and heartbroken she was by his absence. The two maids reinforced this impression when they intervened to justify her position, asserting she couldn't bear to see someone being bullied, and her action stemmed from her noble manners to help others. Peter's eyes teared up with emotion, and he vowed with a choked voice to help her reunite with her family, while Eri's familiar realized from his features that he had completely misunderstood the situation. Meanwhile, near the northern border, a massive explosion occurred at one of the monster bases. The knight accompanying the Grand Duke appeared exhausted and informed him of the completion of the elimination of all neighboring monsters. The knight breathed a sigh of relief, wishing the region would enjoy safety for a while, and complaining about the hours of long and continuous marching and fighting. The knight advised his master to take a break before returning to review reports, but he suddenly stopped in a state of panic, for he noticed a dense aura of dark demonic energy surrounding the Duke and realized the necessity of subjecting him to an urgent purification process. The scene shifted to Harus, the 3-star purification priest, who was startled when the Duke entered his tent due to the density of the demonic energy emitting from him, so he hurried to invite him to sit to begin treatment immediately. The priest set to his work, expressing his deep concern at the extent of the accumulation of this dangerous energy as a result of continuous fighting, and confirming the rumors about the Duke's erosion state reaching level 5. The priest explained that the problem lay in the speed of the energy's reaccumulation even after being purified, pointing out that erosion of this advanced level is like a gradual transformation into a monster devoid of will. The priest warned in a serious tone that at this rate, the Duke wouldn't be able to hold out for much longer. Declan bowed his head with features covered in exhaustion, calmly answering him that he realized the truth of his situation perfectly. Priest Harus meditated with regret, realizing that his 3-star purification magic offered only little help, and in those difficult moments, he wished they had a 5-star purification wizard among them, those who could heal everyone just by their presence. In the midst of his reflections, he was interrupted by the Duke's accompanying knight, Raspin, who arrived in a hurry to tell him that he had an urgent report to deliver. Raspin entered and informed the Grand Duke that a report had just arrived from Castle Ortigo, stating that the little Lady Airy had caused a major incident. The Duke raised his eyes, wondering in astonishment what that meant. The knight explained that the little lady had gotten into a fight with the young Master Schultz, but what was truly concerning was that the butler insisted heavily on the necessity of the Duke's personal presence to resolve the matter. The Duke asked with concern if the child had been harmed, but the knight reassured him that there was no news of any injury to her. The knight seized the opportunity and enthusiastically suggested they return to the castle to check on her, especially since the mission to subdue the monsters in that area had already ended. But the Duke coldly refused his request. His decision stemmed from his fear for her. She was a child who grew up in the warmth of the South, and if she met him, she might be harmed by the demonic energy flowing through him, to the point that the letters he touched would become contaminated and impossible to deliver. He feared that if he met her and they got to know each other, any attachment between them would become a major problem later on. The Duke recalled the priest's recent warning that his condition was deteriorating and that at this rate he would not hold out for long, as he realized he would soon be completely swallowed by the demonic energy and die, and he did not want to leave such a wound in his child's life. But the knight asked him a moving question, wondering if this was the last chance to see Lady Airy's face in person. Then he insisted playfully, asking him if he really wasn't going to go. It seemed that his knight's words had affected him, so he asked if the child would endure his presence if they used all the magical tools in the castle, and the knight answered enthusiastically that she would be fine for about 10 minutes. The Duke finally surrendered, declaring his defeat in this argument, and ordered the return to the great Ortigo castle. He convinced himself that it would be okay, for since it would be the last time, it was enough to see her face directly and ask her to return to the warmth of the South. The next day at Castle Ortigo, one of the maids expressed her extreme surprise, as she realized that the little lady had caused all those problems on purpose just to be able to see the Grand Duke. Then she added happily that her plan was successful, for news had just arrived stating that the Duke was on his way to the castle. Airy, who was wrapped in thicker protective clothing to be safe when meeting the Duke, celebrated while the maid commented on how cute she looked. Her familiar friend whispered to her that the Duke was coming and that her plan had succeeded brilliantly, and she confirmed that with joy. The familiar asked her enthusiastically if she would finally meet her father. Airy froze for moments upon hearing the word father, and the familiar asked with concern if something was wrong, but she denied it. That was the first time she had thought about it. The Grand Duke is her father. This idea brought her back to painful memories from her previous life, where she was scolded and treated as a burden and a source of annoyance. She remembered that her parents in her previous life did not love her much, so she wondered in worry about the Grand Duke of Ortigo, and whether he would be happy to see her. The familiar noticed her tension, so he reassured her and asked her not to be afraid, emphasizing that he would stay by her side, and he reminded her that she would become the strongest hero, so there was nothing to fear. His words triggered another memory from her past, when her grandmother defended her fiercely and insisted on raising her herself, so she realized that she always had a precious person protecting her. And she realized that things haven't changed now. Her grandmother, her cookie friend, the head maid, and the rest of the maids, all of them stand by her side. She was filled with determination and decided that this time she would protect everyone, save the world with style, and they would all live happily and eat delicious food. With this new resolve, she declared to herself that she was no longer afraid of anything at all. While Eri was immersed in her determination, the head maid and another maid suddenly noticed a strange feeling of lightness and calm flowing through their bodies, and they exchanged looks of astonishment. At that moment, her familiar friend whispered in her ear enthusiastically, telling her that she had finally succeeded in her first purification process. Joy overwhelmed the child to the point that she began flapping her arms in the air with excessive enthusiasm, letting out a cry of happiness. She laughed with pride while her friend praised her, explaining that it wasn't difficult because these people had already opened their hearts to her. Her friend noticed that the atmosphere in the room had become brighter and expressed his regret that no one knew she was the one who purified the demonic energy. In the meantime, Butler Peter approached Eri and asked her to prepare to go out, for he told her that the Grand Duke would arrive soon, and she answered him with enthusiasm and confidence. Indeed, the Grand Duke arrived accompanied by his knights at the castle courtyard, where his assistant whispered to him, pleading with him to be gentle with her in their first meeting. From afar, the maids were watching the scene and encouraging the little lady not to feel nervous and to do her best. Eri stared at the person standing before her and realized that this was the Grand Duke Ortigo, but she noticed that he was standing a very long distance away from her, which made her mutter in annoyance. The headmaid explained to her that the magical energy surrounding the Duke was so strong that they were forced to stand far away and speak through a magical communication tool, which made Eri grumble and describe him in her mind as a cotton bud because of his extreme distance. The Duke looked at that little child wrapped in protective clothing, while she was holding the spherical communication tool tightly. In a low and hesitant voice, she gave a greeting that rang out loudly through the magical tool, surprising the Duke and his assistant. He asked her how she was, and she replied with childish enthusiasm that she was perfectly fine, and even very strong, trying to show off her small muscles. She was thinking about her tight plan that she set with her friend, which she called Operation Settlement in the North, and it included 3 main steps. First, meeting the Grand Duke. Second, winning his favor and getting close to him. And third, asking him to allow her to stay in the North so she could purify him, and she saw this plan as very perfect. And she was confident in its success because she considers herself the hero who came to save the North. The Duke heard her words, but he wondered to himself coldly if children of this time dream of becoming heroes. She replied enthusiastically, emphasizing that she was already a hero, and that there was a very important matter she had to tell him. At that moment, her familiar friend reminded her that her ability to purify necessarily meant she was also immune to demonic energy. This realization lit up her mind, so she declared enthusiastically that she had discovered something amazing, which was that she was actually an immune person. The Duke replied in surprise, explaining that no case had been recorded where a non-immune person became immune, but she insisted that she had become so. And this meant she no longer had to wear these bloated clothes that resemble bread. The Duke insisted she was still in danger and must continue to wear them, so her friend whispered to her that this man saturated with demonic energy doesn't believe a single word of what she says. Eri began to think about how to convince him, and concluded that the most important thing now was for them to become friends first. Immediately, she asked the servant standing beside her about what the Duke likes. So Peter told her that his sword, the Ego Sword, is something he cherishes greatly. And the headmaid added that he loves delicious food too. Then the headmaid added that he also enjoys taking walks while fighting monsters. So the idea lit up Eri's mind, and she decided she would go for a walk with the Grand Duke to become his friend. She imagined that after they became close, if she told him the truth sincerely, he would surely believe her. And when she settles in the North this way, she will purify him. And thus the adventure of the great hero will finally begin. She returned to talking with the Duke and asked him hesitantly to take a tour around the castle and invited him to accompany her for a walk. So the Duke agreed, thinking she just wanted to explore the place. Then the Duke turned to his knight Raspin and ordered him to hand her that map, which triggered the knight's shock, who wondered if he realized what he was saying, for how could he give her something of this value? Wondering if the Duke was sure of his decision, Knight Raspin approached Eri and told her that the Grand Duke ordered him to give her a map of the Grand Duke's castle. He explained to her that with this map, she would be able to wander the castle on her own, which struck Eri with extreme shock and disappointment. For this was exactly the opposite of what she wanted, as she was planning, to wander with him to become friends, while he believed she would be satisfied with this solution, making her realize that the Grand Duke's defenses were completely impregnable. In a desperate attempt, she shouted, stopping him. The Duke stopped and looked at her silently, while his assistant wondered what was happening. Eri wondered in confusion if she had said something wrong, which the knight wasn't sure of either. The child thought that perhaps she should have been more polite, so she apologized to him for bothering him, but she added that she had something else she would like to ask. Then she shouted again with all her might, pleading with him to listen to her, but this time she called him by a strange title, Grandpa Grand Duke. The echo of the word grandpa resonated in the place, while she tried to explain to him that she really was an immune person. She added that she could purify things too and pleaded with him to allow her to stay in the north for a little while longer, which impressed the knight, who commented on how polite she was. The knight believed that calling him grandpa puts a huge distance between them, meaning there was no need to worry about her being attached to him. But the Duke was infuriated by this title and coldly ordered Raspin to stay away from him. Then he ordered his men to ensure the child was returned safely, while she was shouting from afar, trying to stop him. Meanwhile, in the guest reception room at Castle Ortigo, Countess Dira, Schultz's mother, was waiting with concern and tension. She remembered when butler Peter entered and told her that the Grand Duke was on his way back because of her son's attack on the little lady, and that a meeting would be held soon. The Countess was infuriated, for after they seized the Duke's absence to expand their family's influence, her son Schultz comes along, who was always last in, his academy and a constant source of problems, to spoil everything at this critical timing. She ordered her son to beg for forgiveness upon the Duke's arrival, but the boy replied indifferently, saying he didn't think anything big would happen. And he told her what he heard from his friends, that little lady had been expelled to the south because she has no abilities, and that the Grand Duke doesn't care anyway about a weak person like her. Suddenly, the Grand Duke appeared in the room with a dark aura, interrupting their talk by saying he didn't think this was the right time for such talk. Horror struck them, and they hurried to offer greetings and respect to the Duke. Despite her confusion, the Countess thought to herself that Schultz was right, and that this cruel Duke, nicknamed Demon Slayer, would not care about his daughter's matter. She believed that if they apologized and showed loyalty, he would surely forgive them, but she soon felt suffocated by the density of the demonic energy emitting from him. The Duke ignored her apology, considering what happened as the responsibility of adults, and decided that since he had returned, it was time to restore order to the north, announcing the summoning of the cavalry led by the Countess's family starting from that day. The Countess collapsed on her knees, pleading for mercy and apologizing sincerely. While the Duke was leaving, his knight told him about rumors spreading in the castle. The rumors said that the little lady is non-immune and has no special abilities, and that if she stayed in the north for longer, something dangerous might happen. The Duke remembered his late wife's words as she asked him to give their children everything they wanted. Then Aries' words came back to his mind as she pleaded with him, emphasizing that she is immune and wants to stay in the north, so he realized that this was her desire. A look of hope glittered in his eyes, and he wondered if she truly was immune. Perhaps he could stay with her even for a short while. He remembered that there are two ways to verify whether a person is immune, either by using the ancient stone in the royal palace or by using the ability measurement room in Castle Ortigo. The Duke remembered that upon Aries' birth, the ability measurement room was shattered for an unknown reason, and for that reason, she could only be tested using the ancient stone in the royal palace. Since that means was no longer available, the Duke decided that the only way remaining now was to use the room in the castle, and ordered his knight Raspin to go and deliver an order to open the ability measurement room. While the Duke was walking in one of the castle corridors, he noticed something lying on the floor, to be surprised that it was his daughter's gingerbread man. The Duke looked at it coldly, wondering why no one cleans this place, then continued his way with his knight. Once they were away, the cookie man stood up feeling satisfied because he decided to come here, and concluded that it was better to return to Aerie immediately. He rushed back to the child's room, who received him with happiness, so he told her enthusiastically that he returned after scouting the Grand Duke's movements. Aerie was contemplating the map the Duke gave her, while her friend was expressing his awe of it. It showed even the secret passages of the castle in detail, meaning they can now wander every nook and cranny as they please. The familiar added that it seems as if the Grand Duke had given her full authority over the castle, and that based on what he saw, that old man might not be as bad as he thought, and he mentioned that she seemed to be occupying his thoughts, which Aerie found strange, as she found it difficult to believe that. She felt that, although he was not like her parents in her previous life, he did not seem fond of her at all. Her friend sighed, expressing his hope that they would be able to get along and harmonize. Then he added indifferently that the Grand Duke seemed anyway as if he was going to die soon, words that struck Aerie with extreme shock. The familiar explained that when he saw her father up close, he realized that his demonic energy contamination was much worse than he imagined, and that his survival until now is in itself a miracle, and that he is likely in a state where he cannot even use his powers properly. Aerie realized with concern that if the Grand Duke, the protector of the North, disappeared, this world would collapse in a short time. At that moment, the communication tool the Duke gave her lit up, and he asked her how she was. Aerie looked at the tool with determination, and decided in herself that even if that old man didn't love her, and even if he didn't allow her to approach him, she didn't want him to die. But her friend reminded her of the reality of the matter, With her tiny purification power, it would be difficult for her even to approach him. Eri told her friend that she was thinking of a plan during his absence and showed him a map she drew of the castle, pointing to the presence of many people in it, and she explained her idea to him. Since her ability allows her to purify demonic energy by befriending people, if she wanders around the palace and befriends everyone and absorbs all that demonic energy, she will be able to become a 5-star purifier in a short time, and then she will be able to save the Grand Duke as well. The familiar was impressed by the idea, emphasizing that her purification power would increase quickly this way. Eri got excited and decided to start immediately, pointing to the starting point she chose on the map. Her friend looked at the place she pointed to and asked her in surprise if she was serious about her choice. Eri reached her destination, the kitchen, and greeted everyone with a bright smile, causing astonishment among the workers there who wondered about the reason for her sudden visit. Someone asked her why she came, and she replied enthusiastically that she came because she wanted to take a look at the kitchen. Her friend whispered to her, wondering why she chose the kitchen of all places. She answered with shining eyes that delicious food is the ultimate power, which completely confused her friend. She explained that she remembers her grandmother's saying that the person who holds the ladle is the true ruler, so she decided to get close to the kitchen staff, eat many delicious things, and deal with the demonic energy. She added that she would also bring a lot of delicious food to that old man, remembering that he likes it. So her friend considered her a genius, for this plan achieves 3 goals at once. The head chef approached her, who introduced herself as Norma, and welcomed her, then asked her if she truly felt curious about what was inside the kitchen. Norma, the head chef of the Eastern Kitchen, warned the little lady of the presence of many dangerous things in the kitchen, including the ovens, and asked her to be extremely careful, wondering if she would be okay. So Eri assured her confidently that she would be fine. Norma then invited her to step forward, while the familiar was watching the head chef with concern, thinking she looked sharp-tempered and wondering if things would go well. As soon as they entered, they were surprised by the presence of the head chef of the Western Kitchen, Nara, who noticed the little lady's presence and welcomed her with respect, introducing herself. Eri was totally stunned when she realized that Norma and Nara look exactly identical, too. Discover everyone that they are twin chefs sharing the kitchen's leadership. But the atmosphere soon became tense when Nara addressed her sister Norma sharply, wondering why she was there and asking her to return to her work immediately. Norma did not accept this, so she replied angrily, emphasizing she would do as she pleased, denouncing receiving orders from her sister. Nara accused her of being quick-tempered because she still feels bitter that Nara was the one who took responsibility for preparing the Grand Duke's breakfast, to which Norma replied mockingly, considering the matter ridiculous, and wondering why she was digging up events that occurred years ago. The argument continued as each accused the other of acting trivial, while Eri stood in the middle in a state of extreme confusion over this sudden argument. So the familiar noticed that the 2 chefs do not agree with each other at all. The familiar suggested to Eri to search for another goal, believing that purifying this place full of disputes would be difficult, but Eri's attention was suddenly distracted when she smelled a fragrant food scent. The delicious scent caught her attention, and she soon realized it was the scent of a delicious dish prepared from grains. Norma noticed the scent too, so she seized the opportunity to scold Nara again, accusing her of doing useless things once more. Nara denounced describing her work as useless, defending herself fiercely and explaining that this dish was prepared specifically for the Grand Duke who loves rich grain dishes. Norma mocked her claim, asserting confidently that the Grand Duke prefers sweets, justifying that sweet food improves the mood in general, which increased the tension between them. The discussion heated up more when Nara claimed she knows the Grand Duke's preferences more than anyone else by virtue of her working in the castle for 30 years, to which Norma replied, boasting that she was the one who accompanied him even to the battlefield tents. And while they returned to arguing, the dark demonic energy began to rise around them clearly. The maid stepped forward, apologizing to the little lady for her having to see this inappropriate scene during her visit, explaining that the 2 chefs always argue upon meeting, but Eri reassured them with a smile that she was perfectly fine. She recalled at that moment memories of her previous life as a Taekwondo black belt holder, considering herself an expert in dealing with such common women's arguments. Despite her realization of the rule that children shouldn't intervene in adults' affairs, she noticed the features of annoyance and distress on the faces of all the kitchen staff due to this chaos. Her eyes glittered with determination, believing that this is the perfect time for a polite child to intervene to resolve the conflict, and she tightened her grip, preparing to act. Eri rushed forward and with her loudest childish voice demanded everyone to pay attention and be quiet immediately. A sudden silence hung over the entire kitchen, and the 2 chefs turned toward her in wonder, so the child declared seriously that she has something to say to both of them. Her plan required helping the two chefs to reconcile, and at the same time seizing the opportunity to purify the kitchen of the demonic energy accumulated in it. She started her talk with a wide smile, praising the lunch meal she ate and emphasizing that it was extremely delicious. This was her first strategy to calm their anger, as she decided to use the weapon of flattery and praise that adults cannot resist, then climbed on a small chair to be at their eye level, which caused their astonishment. She asked them innocently if they had prepared lunch together, expressing her sincere desire to thank them for their effort. Then, she specifically mentioned the purslane herb dish, showing extreme admiration for it, a matter that struck the two chefs with total amazement, wondering how a child could know this herb and find it palatable, especially since children usually hate its bitter taste. But the child began explaining to them gently and confidently that purslane is considered a very useful medicinal herb for the body, pointing to the sayings that emphasize that eating it regularly acts as a medicine that extends life and might even make a person live for 100 years. The twin chefs agreed with her words with great surprise and wondered in confusion about how a young lady could know information like this. Eri replied simply that her grandmother was the one who told her that, then praised them warmly, describing them as geniuses for making this dish. Making signs of shyness and happiness cover the faces of the two chefs following this unexpected praise. Before this flattery, they offered her to taste boiled purslane water, with a prior warning of its bitter taste. But Eri accepted the offer with extreme enthusiasm, emphasizing her ability to eat bitter things too. The two chefs hurried to present the hot drink to her with overwhelming happiness, with some other herbal additions. And while Eri was sipping from the large cup, all the kitchen staff gathered around her, glancing at her with looks full of admiration and affection. The familiar noticed that the atmosphere in the kitchen had softened a bit, so he smiled to himself, considering that adults always weaken before flattery and kind words. Eri winked her eye joyfully, thinking that the two chefs had opened their hearts to her even if just a little. Yet the dark demonic energy halo was still rising around the place without being absorbed. The familiar thought with concern, concluding that the failure to purify the demonic energy meant they hadn't fully gotten close yet to those in the kitchen, pointing out that raising the purification power quickly to get close to the Grand Duke seems a very difficult matter. But Eri did not surrender to despair. Rather, she sat with determination, asserting to herself that the matter is not impossible, recalling her grandmother's advice that constant thinking about any problem will inevitably lead to the emergence of the appropriate solution for it. The child took to thinking deeply, recalling the fact that Norma, the head chef of the Western kitchen, specializes in sweets and sweet dishes, while Nera, the head chef of the Eastern kitchen, is responsible for grain dishes. And she remembered how the two chefs were arguing fiercely earlier about the Grand Duke's food preferences and what should be served to him. Eri wondered to herself if there was an innovative way to open their hearts together, thinking of finding a dish that merges between grains and sweets to be something that satisfies both parties and settles this dispute. Suddenly, her eyes glittered with a genius idea, and she smiled confidently because she remembered a specific drink that could fulfill this purpose perfectly. The next day, the usual argument was renewed in the kitchen, where Nera asked Norma to move out of her way, to which the latter replied with emotion, emphasizing that this is her kitchen and that Nera must return to her private area. The maids watched the argument with disappointment, talking about the ferocity of the conflict that returned today to hang over the place. Although the atmosphere seemed as if it improved the previous day thanks to Lady Eri's visit, this charged atmosphere was interrupted by Eri's sudden entry as she gave a morning greeting with a bright smile, causing the maids' astonishment at her return again. The child came forward with a kind request, asking permission to use the kitchen for some time, and pleading with them to provide her with some rice, beans, and Job's tears. The twin chefs stood in a state of amazement as they watched the little child beginning work with enthusiasm amidst the sounds of pots and ingredients. Eri enthusiastically announced the end of her preliminary preparations while standing behind the ingredients table, for the two chefs to wonder curiously about the type of dish the young lady intends to prepare. Eri realized that children cannot use the stove directly to ensure their safety, so she asked Chef Nera to help her toast the barley, which Nera agreed to immediately and with total pleasure. Eri continued giving her directions gently, asking her to toast the beans and perilla seeds too, then collect these ingredients together and grind them into a fine powder. Nera asked the young lady curiously if she was interested in grain dishes, for Eri to confirm that to her with extreme enthusiasm. Nera was flattered by this response and looked at Norma with challenge, praising the young lady's intelligence and emphasizing that grain dishes are what truly satisfies unlike sweets, and that the rest of the immediate family members loved them fiercely too. Eri listened to her words with a wide smile, then surprised her, explaining that this dish indeed contains grains, but at the same time it is considered a delicious dessert. Nara was shocked by this idea and wondered indignantly if that was possible, believing that grain dishes are usually used as substitutes for main meals only and cannot be a dessert. Eri then turned to Chef Norma and asked her to provide her with some sugar and milk, so Norma agreed immediately to fulfill her request. And while the ingredients were being poured and mixed, everyone wondered in confusion about the type of strange dish the child was trying to prepare by merging sugar and milk with grain powder. As soon as she finished preparing the drink, she enthusiastically announced its readiness and offered everyone to taste it, for the two chefs to sip from it, and features of extreme surprise appeared on them. One of them asked eagerly for the name of this wondrous drink, so Eri almost mentioned the name of her grandmother who used to sell in Korean markets in her previous life, but she quickly corrected the matter. She proudly announced that this is the misugaru drink on Eri's way, and asked them for their opinion, so they admitted that it gives a feeling of fullness and satiety because it is rich in grains, and at the same time is characterized by its delicious sweet taste. Norma expressed extreme admiration for the drink, emphasizing that it is very delicious, and guessed that it is surely one of the drinks the child used to have in the warm South. The chefs passed the drink in awe, expressing their astonishment at the existence of a food that merges between the characteristics of satiety and sweetness together in this harmonious and excellent way. Nara admitted with a shy smile that sweet things are not as bad as she thought all along, for Norma to reply with a light mockery, wondering if she realized that just now. Norma in turn agreed that the dish is truly delicious, and suggested humbly that she start using more grains in her Western kitchen from now on, for both of them to look as if they finally gave up their mutual stubbornness. In the light of this new friendly atmosphere, the two chefs asked the young lady to repeat to them the recipe for preparing this magic drink, so Eri agreed enthusiastically, and began explaining to them playfully how they add a large amount of sugar and many toasted grains. The maids in the kitchen watched the scene in amazement, not believing that the two twin head chefs are working together in cooking with features filled with happiness and radiance. In those warm moments, the dark demonic energy halo began to leak from the bodies of the kitchen staff, for one of them to realize that just looking at the young lady Eri sends a feeling of purification, confirming to herself the truth of what is rumored about her. The familiar alerted Eri enthusiastically to the emergence of the demonic energy, emphasizing that this is the right moment to move, so the child responded with determination and readiness. Eri focused her energy, deciding to absorb all that bad demonic energy first, then converting it into pure purification power inside her own purification ring. The dark halo turned into a bright golden light filling the place, for the familiar to cheer happily, emphasizing that the demonic energy purification process is going successfully. Thanks to the weakness of that demonic energy, the purification process ended with extreme speed, for all traces of the dark halo that was pervading the kitchen to disappear completely, and the workers returned to their work with cheer. The familiar praised the young lady's amazing work and told her that he had prepared for her her own personal purification status window as a reward for her success. The system screen appeared announcing Eri's purification status, the strongest hero in the world, pointing out that she is currently at the 1st star level, Seed of Light, and only 4 spaces separate her from reaching the 2nd star level, Tree of Light. The child rejoiced intensely, stunned by how she became stronger just by preparing 1 bowl of misugaru drink. And although the familiar pointed out that it was just 1 space filled, yet it was a wonderful achievement for her. But she soon regained her seriousness, reminding herself that a great hero should never let their guard down, and that there was a more important reason that drove her to come to the kitchen in the first place. Eri turned toward the 2 head chefs and with extreme politeness told them that she has a question she would like to pose to them, so the 2 chefs responded with attention. The child wondered curiously about the type of food the Grand Duke Ortigo prefers, trying to gather information to prepare something that satisfies him. At a later time, the luxurious food carts covered with silver covers were prepared, while Eri was resolving in her heart to get close to the Grand Duke, hoping she would be able to stay in the north for a period much longer than the week specified for her. Eri ran with fast and playful steps in the castle courtyard toward the Grand Duke, and gave him a greeting with a loud voice and extreme enthusiasm, for him to turn to her and look at her silently. The child stood before the food carts loaded with the most delicious dishes, believing confidently that presenting delicious food would be her key to get close to him without a doubt. The Duke was training in the training courtyard holding his sword, and when he noticed her presence, he asked her calmly about the reason for her coming to this place. She answered with a proud smile while revealing the dishes, explaining that she came to bring him his meal, which she prepared herself with the help of the entire kitchen staff. The surrounding knights watched the scene with extreme admiration for the little lady's cuteness, affected by her coming all this distance to present food to her father. and one of them compared between her and his mischievous son who throws his food, then urged the Duke to accept her deed. But the Duke reminded him coldly that he cannot approach her, asking him to bring the food to him himself. Eri placed the tray before him and began explaining the dish's ingredients to him enthusiastically, pointing to a dish made of a mixture of purslane and tansy, and a drink prepared by grinding barley and beans, emphasizing to him that all of them are extremely delicious dishes. The Duke was surprised by her choices, wondering to himself about the reason a child of her age prefers ingredients like purslane and beans instead of chocolate, and denouncing her possession of a taste that resembles grandmother's taste, especially since he himself does not favor bitter foods. While she was waiting for his reaction with shining eyes, the Duke raised the drink cup and sipped a sip from it, for his eyes to widen a bit in surprise, admitting with a low voice that its taste is indeed delicious. Eri's face brightened with a victory smile, emphasizing to him with pride that this drink is called misugaru, and that it gives its drinker great energy and vitality. The Duke looked at her with a piercing look, wondering skeptically if she had truly prepared it herself, and inquiring about the secret ingredient that made it taste this good, and even reached the point of wondering seriously if she had put poison in it, which struck the child with extreme shock, and she denied that fiercely. Confusion pervaded Eri's mind, so she wondered innocently if he considers delicious foods equivalent to poison, and if he prefers eating poisons, considering that his taste is very mysterious. For the Duke to correct the matter for her denying this strange conclusion, the Duke crossed his arms and asked her with clear annoyance about the reason for her constant naming of him with the title Old Man, explaining to her that he is only 33 years old, for the child to gasp with total shock upon hearing this number. Eri began counting on her fingers in awe, trying to comprehend the age difference between them, and she exclaimed in surprise that he is 28 full years older than her, considering the matter amazing, then returned to offer him with extreme politeness to taste the rest of the dishes she prepared. The Duke noticed that her style in talking became more polite and formal, so he wondered to himself at the extent of her linguistic vocabulary development, although her age does not exceed 5 years. But his thoughts were cut off when one of the knights interrupted him to talk with his assistant Raspin. Assistant Raspin turned toward the Grand Duke and informed him with respect that preparations for opening the ability measurement room he previously requested have finally been completed. The Duke echoed the room's name while looking at Eri, then invited her to accompany him to go there to test her abilities. Eri stood with features filled with determination, ready to go to verify the extent of her immunity against demonic energy. As soon as they reached a huge and majestic hall, the child looked around in awe, wondering about the nature of this place, for Assistant Raspin to explain to her that this is the ability measurement room of the Great Ortigo Castle. Raspin added with a friendly smile that this room's function is not limited to measuring abilities only, but can also confirm whether the person possesses immunity or not, for Eri to thank him with politeness for this thorough explanation. The assistant continued his talk, heralding her that in case the results prove her possession of immunity, it is likely that she will be allowed to stay in the north for a longer period. Happiness overwhelmed Eri's heart, and she thought naively that the Grand Duke had arranged this test immediately because her plan to get close to him using delicious food had finally succeeded, although the truth was furthest from that. The child wondered curiously about how to determine a person's immunity, so Raspin explained to her that every human body contains what is called a circle, explaining that Duke Declan will use his energy to touch Eri's circle to test her. The assistant completed explaining that an immune person's circle is extremely sensitive toward others' energies and repels them with force and speed, meaning that the reaction will reveal the truth immediately. Features of total confusion appeared on Eri's face, admitting her failure to understand a single word of what he said, for Raspin to laugh gently and reassure her that there is no need for tension because the matter will end in the blink of an eye. And he asked her to stand in a specific square on the floor, for the child to hasten to fulfill his request with enthusiasm and obedience. Raspin watched the situation with extreme concern, realizing in his heart that examining someone else's abilities places a heavy burden on the executor, and in light of the Duke's current deteriorating state, using his energy might expose his abilities to distortion or damage. Despite those fears, the Duke announced coldly the start of the test, raising his hand to release his energy, while his assistant remained wondering with concern if this decision was truly safe, remembering the Duke's insistence that the matter doesn't matter. Thick strands of dark red magical energy flowed from the Duke's hand, heading directly toward the little child to surround her from every side to test her immunity. And while the red energy was enveloping her, a pure light glowed from inside Eri's chest, for the child to feel a slight sting and a strange feeling flowing in her body, wondering if the Duke was examining her strength now. Eri remembered at that moment that by tomorrow a week would be completed since her arrival at the north, meaning the approach of her return date to the south, but she smiled confidently, renewing her determination to stay as the strongest hero who will save this world. And she wished in her secret that the Grand Duke would notice her amazing strength that she hides, while the magical energy began to interact with her body. Duke Declan's features changed, suddenly to show signs of surprise on them, when he noticed that his magical energy was fading and dissipating strangely as soon as it touched the child. The Duke pulled his hand quickly after his energy completely faded, while Eri stood completely safe, for him to announce calmly the end of the test, calling her by her full name. And with a tone carrying a decisive confirmation, the Duke finally informed her that she indeed possesses immunity. Assistant Raspin was deeply shocked by this result, wondering in awe if this was true, for the Duke to confirm the matter to him with strictness, pointing out that he verified it himself and there is no room for doubt. But the Duke remained immersed in his thoughts, considering that what happened is considered a very strange matter, for in the history of the North, no case had been recorded for a person born without immunity, then gaining it later. Eri jumped in the air with overwhelming cheer, proud of being a strong hero as she always thought, then asked him enthusiastically if he had also managed to confirm the presence of purification power inside her. The Duke hesitated a bit before telling her gently that she indeed has a very tiny amount of purification power, barely equivalent to the weakest level of the 1-star category. Raspin whispered to the Duke, warning him that informing her of this harsh truth might hurt her feelings. But contrary to their expectations, Eri was not annoyed at all, but considered her possession of any amount of strength an amazing matter, for Raspin to watch her with a smile, concluding that her optimistic personality makes her not worry about anything, and that she resembles her father in certain aspects as a father and his daughter. The child hastened to ask the Duke, with her eyes shining with hope, if this proof meant allowing her to stay for a longer period, for the Duke to answer her calmly that there is no objection to her, staying for an extra month or two if she wanted that. Eri set off running around in overwhelming happiness while she cheered joyfully that she would live in the castle from now on, while the Duke stood watching her silently. The Duke contemplated the child with calm features, recalling how he lived throughout those years without taking into his account that he would one day be able to touch her or get close to her. He believed he would spend his entire life without being given a chance to see her up close, and before her bright smile, he wished in his heart if they could stay together for a longer period, but he tightened his grip with bitterness, realizing he is still unable to give up his caution. For the bitter truth is that her approach to him and her touching his body saturated with demonic energy might expose her to harm, a reality that hasn't changed despite her immunity. Eri came forward toward him, wondering innocently if she could approach him now, for the Duke to refuse her request with strictness, explaining that the matter is still dangerous for her, and that they will monitor the situation currently, and in case any danger threatening her is found, he will return her to the south immediately. The child flinched from his firm tone and retreated in fear, wondering with concern and tension if her staying in the castle truly causes him annoyance and trouble. Duke Declan explained to Eri that he did not mean to distance her, but was being extremely cautious, fearing that his magical energy might cause a negative effect on her body. He added that she can stay in the north safely as long as she maintains a separating distance estimated at 2.5 meters between them. He emphasized that her approach to this extent would be acceptable, and since it has been confirmed she possesses purification ability, he decided that it is better for her to receive appropriate training to hone that talent. Accordingly, the Duke issued his orders to his assistant Raspin to contact immediately the purification wizards in the Northern Magic Tower, a matter the assistant responded to with enthusiasm and obedience. Happiness overwhelmed Eri's heart, for she realized that her plan had finally succeeded, and that she had indeed obtained the desired permission from the Grand Duke to stay in the north. The child thanked the Duke warmly, thinking in herself that nothing remains for her now but serious training to become a strong hero capable of saving everyone. At a later time, Eri was shown a wide room filled to its brim with carefully wrapped gift boxes, where Raspin explained to her that Duke Declan was preparing these gifts specifically for her throughout the past 5 years, and was keen to replace them regularly using magic to prevent their contamination with demonic energy. The child was dazzled by the gifts' radiance and abundance, while Raspin and the headmaid expressed their overwhelming happiness for finally being able to present them to her, emphasizing their readiness to fulfill any other needs she might request throughout her stay. They added sincerely that they are in extreme happiness because she will stay in the north for a longer period after her immunity was proven, for Eri in turn to confirm her happiness with a wide smile. Thanks to her immunity confirmation, Eri was finally allowed to give up the bloated protective suit that was restricting her movement, and her hair was styled freely, for the headmaid to encourage her to take her time in exploring the gifts and the place with total comfort. The familiar appeared dazzled by the massive amount of gifts, while a box containing a cute stuffed doll caught Eri's attention, to learn later that the Duke had picked it personally on his way to her. The child happily tried a collection of clothes, shoes, and accessories that were made specifically to fit her size accurately, to conclude in her heart that the Grand Duke Ortego's actions are nothing but the actions of a loving father who is fiercely fond of his daughter. The familiar congratulated Eri on this development, pointing out that her success guarantees her a longer and more stable stay in the castle as she planned. And the familiar noticed that the Grand Duke did not pay attention to the presence of her purification ring, expressing his slight disappointment for being the only one who realizes the extent of her true wonder. But Eri justified that with a smile, explaining that great heroes often hide their true abilities in the beginning. The familiar realized her clever plan, for she intends to increase her purification power first in secret, then revealing it later as a stunning surprise for everyone, for her to confirm to him her enthusiasm for the idea of the hidden hero with overwhelming power. The familiar got extremely excited for the idea of the secret strong duo, and they agreed to work together to become the strongest and surprise everyone later, emphasizing to her that his presence as the strongest summoned being will make achieving this goal a very easy matter. But in the midst of their enthusiastic plans, they were suddenly interrupted by a violent and terrifying crash sound that shook the castle's corners. Eri wondered in horror about the sound's source and rushed toward the window, to witness a state of panic and screaming spreading among the knights and maids in the external courtyard. It turned out that the reason for the chaos was the appearance of a huge and scary flying monster resembling a giant hornet, which managed to penetrate the castle's defenses and reach its internal walls. The monster hovered over the courtyard threateningly, while the knights present there hurried to draw their swords in preparation to face it bravely. Eri watched the terrifying scene from behind the glass, accompanied by the headmaid, who explained to her that the monster must have followed the rear unit knights returning today, disguised until it managed to sneak inside. Extreme horror overcame Eri, and her eyes began to tremble with fear, thinking if it was necessary for her as a hero to intervene to save the people, while the headmaid stood beside her with total calm without showing any sign of panic. The headmaid smiled with confidence and reassurance, and reassured the young lady, asking her not to worry at all. And she justified her calm that Duke Declan is present in the castle and will take care of the matter. And indeed, the Duke appeared as he was advancing with confident and calm steps toward the courtyard, holding his sword. In the blink of an eye, the Duke directed a cutting strike with his sword toward the top, to release a destructive energy wave that split the flying monster in half, to meet its end with a loud scream immediately. Assistant Raspin watched the scene in awe, commenting on the flow of massive magical energy from the Duke, which erased the monster from existence easily. The knights celebrated their master's victory, praising his strength that cut the monster's energy in a moment, and asserting with confidence that even if the monsters manage to reach the castle gates, their inevitable fate is death at the hand of the Grand Duke. While Eri watched that in awe, Eri realized then that Castle Ortego will remain an impregnable and safe fortress as long as the Grand Duke is present to protect it, while the familiar commented on the speed of his finishing the monster with one strike, for the child to whisper to herself, showing her admiration for this old man's strength. And the child was certain that everyone in the castle relies on him completely to protect them, and she stood contemplating his back as he was in the middle of his cheering knights. Despite this dazzling victory, Eri noticed a dark and troubling halo rising intensely from the Duke's body, so she wondered in confusion about the reason for others' failure to notice that, feeling clearly that that strong man looks extremely exhausted and is suffering in silence. Eri recalled in her mind the features of the Grand Duke's face at the moment of his checking her immunity, being perfectly certain that she did not imagine that expression that appeared on him. And she noticed that his features were exactly identical to those that appeared on him just now, when he fended off the flying monster, which drove her to wonder with concern if he was suffering from pain or a health ailment somewhere. The child sat on her bed, thinking in confusion if it was necessary for her to go to check on him. But she remembered the words of Assistant Raspin, who told her that Duke Declan is taking a break currently, so she stopped her idea. And she decided in herself not to disturb him during the weekend while he is resting, fearing that might lead to spoiling her attempts to get close to him, preferring to wait until tomorrow where she will be able to see him. However, the next day passed, then the day that followed without anything new, as the child remained waiting and tramping beside the door in vain. Extreme concern and frustration overcame her for not being able to see even a glimpse of him throughout that period. to the point that she was no longer able to do anything else from the intensity of her tension over him. Her constant concern led her to walk without awareness until she found herself standing directly before his huge room door. There was a sign hung on the door preventing children's entry, and she remembered his prior warning to her not to approach. But her concern for him was outweighing everything. In addition to her sincere desire to present thanks to him personally for all the gifts she received. And while she was standing hesitant, she was surprised by the headmaid who noticed her presence and asked her if she had come to see the Grand Duke. The headmaid understood the situation and told her that the back door dedicated to servants will be opened soon, and offered her to dress her in the magic protective suit so she can take a quick look and return immediately, which made Eri very happy and made her thank her warmly. As soon as she entered stealthily, she caught a glimpse of the Grand Duke reclining on the sofa, so she wondered to herself calmly if he was asleep. The child recalled the necessity of adhering to the promises she makes to adults, asserting to herself that she shouldn't approach him much. But her curiosity overcame her, so she decided to sneak with calm steps to approach a short distance, only believing that that won't harm. She approached, until she stood at his head exactly, and noticed while he was asleep that his features do not show signs of illness, which sent a feeling of relief in her heart. But suddenly, the Duke knitted his eyebrows intensely while he was deep in his sleep, so the child concluded with concern that perhaps he sees a nightmare or a sad dream. Out of her innocence and sympathy, she stretched her small hand to touch his wrinkled forehead, wishing in her secret that he wouldn't be haunted by sad dreams even if he doesn't smile in reality. And as soon as she touched his skin without awareness from her, she realized her mistake and remembered that she shouldn't touch a person without permission. But it was too late, as the demonic energy began to rise intensely. That touch led to a sudden explosion of dark energy that knocked the child down with force to fall on the ground. Eri wondered in horror about what's happening. The familiar appeared, realizing that the child tried unintentionally to purify his complex magical energy. The dark energy swept the place, as it turned out that what's happening is one of the side effects of the purification process failure, which led to the activation of a phenomenon called sharing nightmares. Eri found herself suddenly inside a dark and gloomy world to realize she moved to inside the Duke's dream and saw him standing from afar accompanied by a group of his knights. The child listened to the knights as they were warning the Duke of the consequences if he left the place, pointing out that people will blame him and accuse him that he did not even recover his wife's body, wondering if he was still determined to implement Lady Olivia's last will despite that. The Duke answered with sadness and pain that this was his wife Olivia's desire, for she asked him to leave her body that was contaminated with demonic energy in the plains, praising her being a great knight who loved this world until her last moments. And the Duke continued with a sad and broken smile, asserting that even if the people bore him a grudge or resented him, that won't ever equal the extent of his resentment and blame for himself. Then he vowed with a heart wringing with pain, in order for his wife to rest in peace, that he would protect their children with all his might, even if it cost him his life. In the midst of this moving scene, dark hands of demonic energy began climbing the child's body to pull her downwards, so she felt panic for her inability to move and received a warning from her familiar that her staying for a longer period in this nightmare will expose her to the risk of total swallowing by the evil dream energy. The child wondered in horror about the exit, for the familiar to appear suddenly surrounded by a glowing halo, and reassure her with total confidence that as the strongest summoned being, he will use his powers to save her from this predicament. With a bright light, the familiar urged her to hasten and return to her realistic room to survive this nightmare. And before the vision faded, Eri turned to take a last look at the Duke who stands alone in the darkness, realizing that this nightmare was in reality a sad and painful memory from his past, and felt the extent of the suffering he endures, wondering in herself if there was any way she could help him and alleviate his pain. The Duke suddenly woke up from his sleep, wondering in confusion about what had happened and asking himself if it was all a dream. But Eri soon told him that it was not a dream. The Duke suddenly stood up from his place and moved away from her. In a firm tone, the Duke asked her why she was in his room and warned her of the grave danger surrounding him, asking her not to approach him any closer than that. Eri reassured him with confidence and innocence, pointing out that she was not afraid of the demonic energy because she was wearing her protective suit. But the Duke was not convinced, thinking to himself that this suit was not an invincible, impenetrable shield as she thought. The Duke asked her again why she had snuck into his room, which made her confused and caused her to stutter in an attempt to justify her position. She told him innocently that she only came to thank him for the many gifts he had given her, which confused the Duke and made him turn his face away in embarrassment, telling her that it was not worth all that trouble. Eri was thinking in her heart that until this moment she saw the Grand Duke only as the protector of the North who must be saved to prevent the world's destruction. But now she sees the Duke carrying the burden of saving everyone alone, and she realizes that the matter goes beyond the fate of the world, the future, and her destiny as a hero. Regardless of all that, all she truly wants is for the Grand Duke not to feel pain. At that moment, Eri made a resolve, deciding that from now on she would learn purification magic with diligence and hard work, and she would seek to develop her abilities with extreme speed. The Duke looked at her in confusion at her sudden insistence, and told her that although he did not understand the reason for her intense enthusiasm, she must learn how to control her power even if it was at the 1-star level. Then he smiled gently and encouraged her to do her best in learning, heralding her that the purification wizard who would take over her training would arrive at the castle soon. Meanwhile, in the fiefdom of Marchioness Melissa in the south, a letter arrived from the north that astonished everyone. The letter was from Eri, telling her grandmother that she would stay in the north for an additional 2 months, which struck the Marchioness with extreme shock and horror. The Marchioness imagined her small granddaughter alone in the harsh northern land filled with monsters, and felt panicked at the thought of her staying there for another 2 months. The news spread quickly among the Marchioness's friends, who had prepared a lot of delicious food for Eri, and they felt sad because they would not be able to see her butt dance for 2 months. The Marchioness felt a deep sense of regret, considering that she should not have weakened and allowed her granddaughter to go to that dangerous place where even adults suffer from internal injuries due to demonic energy. But one of her friends tried to calm her down, drawing her attention to a part of the letter mentioning that the ability test proved Eri was immune. But the Marchioness did not calm down, emphasizing that the biggest problem was not whether she was immune or not, but the presence of her child in that desolate land. Her friends tried to console her, and at the end of the letter, they noticed another piece of information Eri had added. She wrote that she had also decided to learn purification magic, meaning that the 5-year-old child would begin difficult studies. Since purification magic is usually learned through a teacher-student relationship, they concluded that Eri would have a teacher as well. This matter concerned one of the friends, for she had heard that most wizards have very strange and stubborn personalities. In Castle Ortigo, the servants were whispering in admiration about the arrival of the famous 3-star purification wizard, Harus, whose presence is considered rare and amazing. Harus appeared, declaring that today is a very important day. He stood before a group of 5 2-star purification wizards he had chosen himself, and told them that they would begin teaching Lady Eri today, asking each of them to present their specialty upon her arrival. One of the young wizards, named Martin, was feeling nervous and wondering why he was brought here, while another wizard told him mockingly that it was impossible for the little lady to choose an old-fashioned theory. But Harus interrupted them, addressing Martin and explaining that his specialty and basic principles is essential in the foundational stage. While they were standing in confusion, they suddenly heard a light pecking sound like the pecking of birds, which surprised them all. The wizards wondered in confusion about the source of the sound that resembled pecking. For one of them to dismiss the idea of it being a knock on the door, as in the North, it was not customary for children to act with such politeness, and they expected more violent behavior, making them completely rule out the existence of a polite child who might knock on the door. But what happened was exactly the opposite of their expectations, as Eri entered while bowing with great respect, and gave them a morning greeting with a bright smile, addressing her words to her new teachers. After a short period, and after Eri succeeded in winning their favor by presenting the delicious Misugaru drink, the wizards, including their leader Harus, expressed their thanks and gratitude, while she enthusiastically asked them to take good care of her from now on. Harus announced the start of the lesson and approached Eri, explaining that since this was her first lesson, there was something that must be confirmed first. He presented her with a list containing 5 different specialties in purification magic: practical purification rituals, application of purification power, principles of purification magic, monster detection, and basic purification meditation, and asked her to choose the field that interested her to start her personal lessons based on that. 2 of the young teachers tried to convince her to choose their specialties, with one offering her an immediate start in practical training, while the other tried to tempt her with the idea of purification rituals held in the forest. They were joined by a 3rd teacher, suggesting the specialty of monster detection that would enable her to monitor them, emphasizing that it would be very fun, while her familiar friend was whispering to her that this was the key to unlocking her true power. Meanwhile, Teacher Martin, responsible for the basic meditation specialty, was standing far away in despair, realizing that his specialty was the least popular of all. and that everyone preferred strong practical lessons. He was certain that the little lady would never choose the simplest basics. But Ari surprised everyone and pointed directly at Teacher Martin, declaring in a loud voice that she chose the 5th class and that she wanted to learn purification meditation at his hands. Shock hit Teacher Martin, who did not believe what he heard and wondered in awe if she had really chosen purification meditation. Her familiar friend was assuring her that her choice was correct and that purification meditation was the best for her, for through it she would be able to attract the surrounding demonic energy. And despite its difficulty, it was the ideal way to absorb that energy effectively. This is the essence and foundation of the purification arts. Teacher Martin did not comprehend the matter, while one of the teachers wondered why she chose to start from the basics, especially since purification meditation attracts demonic energy toward its practitioner, something that might be concerning for some. Everyone had always considered purification meditation to be boring, and even those who tried it out of curiosity soon felt frustrated and bored and gave it up. For this reason, it was always ignored. Despite the other teachers' astonishment, Haraus announced that based on Lady Ari's wish, they would now begin the purification meditation lesson. Teacher Martin began the lesson and asked Ari to sit down, close her eyes, and try to sense the demonic energy hovering around her. He explained to her that if she focused on her meditation, the demonic energy would slowly begin to gather, admitting to himself that it would be difficult for her at first. Martin was certain that she would quickly feel tired and give up, and that in just 30 seconds she would open her eyes and start grumbling. But after 30 full minutes had passed, Ari was still sitting in the meditation position with complete focus, which struck Teacher Martin with extreme shock and horror. Martin did not believe what he saw, for the child was putting in an incredible effort. She was indeed meditating. Her focus was so deep that he initially thought she had dozed off while sitting. But when he looked closely, he clearly noticed that the demonic energy began to gather slowly around her. And Martin was astonished to see a child practicing purification meditation with this seriousness. As for Ari, she felt comfortable, as she found that this meditation was very similar to what she had learned in moral education lessons in Taekwondo in her previous life. She felt as if she had returned once more to the Taekwondo Academy. Despite her realization of the difficulty of attracting demonic energy deliberately as the teacher told her, she decided to focus more. With her increased focus, the demonic energy that gathered around her was pulled directly into her purification ring, to be stored immediately as pure purification power. After moments, Ari opened her eyes with a bright smile, announcing her completion, while everything around her was clean and sparkling. Ari declared with a smile and joy that she had finished her meditation, leaving Teacher Martin in a state of awe and astonishment. Martin noticed that the demonic energy that had gathered around the child had suddenly and completely disappeared, giving the room a brightness and tranquility. Martin wondered to himself if she had failed at the last moment, leading to the dissipation of the energy. However, he was impressed by her ability to gather demonic energy in her first lesson, and more importantly, that she did not take the meditation lesson lightly but followed it with seriousness and sincerity. Ari approached her teacher with small steps and asked him politely and innocently about the grade she received in her meditation for that day. The teacher could not help himself from the shock and, in his heart, gave her a perfect score, 100 out of 100. Joy overwhelmed Ari, and she cheered happily, thanking her teacher and then bowing to him with deep respect. Her exquisite manners impressed Martin, who considered her a rare and unique child. But Martin soon scolded himself, trying to control his enthusiasm and convincing himself that she would soon get bored if she repeated the matter several times. The teacher announced the end of the lesson for that day and promised her another meeting soon, to which Ari replied enthusiastically, emphasizing that she would review the meditation lesson with diligence. Meanwhile, in his office, Grand Duke Declan was reviewing a set of letters. Among them, a letter that had just arrived from the south. The letter was from Marchioness Melissa, in which she explained that she would allow Ari to stay in the north according to her wish. But she warned him in a stern tone that any harm to the child would mean a declaration of war, and added that she would come to the north herself soon. The Duke recalled the memory of the Marchioness holding the infant Ari, vowing that she would raise her herself and would not allow any trace of demonic energy to touch her. The Duke sighed as he put the letter aside, realizing that the Marchioness's strong personality had not changed at all. While he was sitting quietly, he was thinking deeply about the matters that must be dealt with now after informing the South of the situation. But one idea kept haunting him: the extreme strangeness of the child suddenly gaining immunity. His assistant Raspin agreed with him, emphasizing that this is the first case of its kind ever recorded. The Duke began thinking about the possible probabilities. Either her constitution had changed for a natural reason, or there was someone who intervened in her examination 5 years ago. Therefore, he decided that it was necessary to reinvestigate the entire matter. The Duke issued his orders to his assistant to continue monitoring Ari, and asked him to send a request to the imperial palace to obtain an ancient stone. Although the assistant explained that the palace no longer responded well to their requests recently, he agreed to execute the order. The assistant changed the subject and asked the Duke if he had heard the latest news. He told the Duke that he had already heard from Heraus about Lady Aries' distinguished performance in her lessons. The assistant explained that purification meditation is not usually graded, but the teacher was so moved by Aries' performance that he gives her a full mark every time. He added that since Aries began the purification arts lessons, the atmosphere in the Great Castle has significantly changed for the better. Indeed, the servants were congratulating Aerie on obtaining first place in her class. Aerie explained to them with a smile that she is the only student in the class, so she automatically gets full marks. But they continued to congratulate her happily. Even the twin chefs, Norma and Nera, congratulated her on first place and presented her with a wormwood drink as a gift, for which she thanked them happily. While she was drinking, she wondered to herself how everyone knew about her grades and realized that maintaining the concept of a hero with hidden power might become a bit difficult. The news even reached the Grand Duke, who asked her while they were having dinner about her full marks. Aerie noticed that they do not usually eat together, but he prepared a 2.5-meter-long table for her to share the meal with him. Aerie felt extremely happy, realizing that everything was going smoothly, and that she was getting close not only to the castle residents, but to the Grand Duke himself. Her status window appeared, announcing that she was still at the Seat of Light level, but she had advanced 2 extra spaces toward the next level. Her purification power had increased thanks to her absorbing a lot of demonic energy. The child got very excited. Only 2 spaces remained to reach the 2-star level, Tree of Light. She asked her familiar friend if she could now purify the Grand Duke even a little, but he explained to her firmly that she needs to reach the 5-star level to heal him completely. Aerie made a resolve to work harder, and while she was reading one of the books, her familiar friend asked her curiously what she was reading. Aerie told her familiar friend that the book she was reading was the Magic Tower Weekly Diary given to her by Teacher Martin, hoping to find a hint in it that would help her become stronger. She remembered how her teachers in her previous life emphasized the importance of studying from textbooks, and began searching for an article by her teacher Martin, realizing that the book is a summary of Magic Tower news. While she was browsing, an article talking about the Magic Tower allowing monster hybrids to enter to participate in some experiments caught her attention, which raised her confusion. The child wondered about the nature of monster hybrids and the nature of these experiments, to suddenly remember that she had read about this matter in the novel The Monster of the Northern Snowfields. She recalled what she had read, that monster hybrids are beings born from the mating of monsters and humans, and some wizards did not treat them as humans, but rather subjected them to cruel experiments and abuse for their research. As a result, a deep hatred for humans grew in the hearts of the monster hybrids, and they later took revenge on the Magic Tower wizards who performed the experiments on them, and that incident was the starting point of the North's collapse. Aerie clearly remembered reading that in her teacher's book, but the current article mentions they are merely mathematical experiments. She concluded that if what she read was correct, the monster hybrids still exist somewhere inside the Magic Tower and are being subjected to painful experiments. Meanwhile, in the Northern Magic Tower, Teacher Martin was immersed in his meditation. Some other wizards were watching him mockingly, unable to understand his intense passion for meditation, which they considered an addiction. They believed he should learn practical and useful purification magic, wondering about the usefulness of practicing the basics, especially since the purification power is determined at birth. Martin interrupted them angrily, accusing them of jealousy because he became Lady Aries' teacher, and asked them to leave if they were only here to disturb him, making them whisper about his sudden arrogance. They mocked him, asserting that Lady Aerie would soon lose interest in these boring lessons, words that struck Martin to the core. Their thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door, as one of the assistants announced the arrival of a guest to meet Mr. Martin. The guest was Lady Aerie herself, who greeted her teacher kindly. Martin was surprised by her presence and asked her about the reason for her visit to the Magic Tower, especially since there was no scheduled lesson for that day. Aerie told him she read something small in the book he gave her, while she remembered when her familiar friend told her, shocked by the idea that the child intended to tell her teacher that they were conducting horrific experiments on monster hybrids in the tower. The familiar expressed his anger at these evil wizards who dare to perform experiments on others just because they are not human, while Aerie was confirming to him what she read in the book, explaining that the hearts of these hybrids will turn to darkness because of what is happening in the tower. Eri made a resolve and decided that she and her cookie friend would go to save the monster hybrids. She planned that after she disciplined the evil wizards, she would present nice gifts to the monster hybrids, eat delicious food with them, and even teach them taekwondo to become friends. She believed that if she did that, she might be able to stop the destruction of the North, and everyone would live happily. While the familiar was thinking about the ease of reaching the tower and the difficulty of entering it, Eri smiled confidently, declaring that she had a way. Indeed, she reached the tower easily using her teacher's name, declaring she came because she had a question for him. And this was a perfect plan because she already wanted to know more about meditation. One of the other wizards was surprised by her request to review the meditation lesson, thinking he was dreaming. Eri told her teacher enthusiastically that purification meditation is truly amazing, and that the more she practices it, the better she becomes. So she wants to study it more deeply and pleaded with him to give her a little of his time despite his being busy with his research. Martin was deeply moved by her enthusiastic words. With all pleasure, he agreed to teach her and promised her that he would show her the true power of purification meditation and asked her to ask him anything she wanted. Thus, meditation sessions began between Eri and her teacher Martin as they sat together working hard and meditating deeply. After a while, Martin suggested they take a short break. The familiar told Eri that the time had come to go search for the monster hybrids, so the child turned toward her teacher Martin, asking his permission to take a quick tour to explore the tower. The teacher agreed with a friendly smile, telling her she was free to wander anywhere she wanted, but warned her against approaching the secret laboratory located underground. The mention of the secret laboratory piqued the child's curiosity to ask about it, so Martin explained to her that it is a place closed to strangers and requires a special permit to enter, describing it as a labyrinth of experimental rooms pervaded by total chaos. While the teacher considered that there was nothing interesting to see there, Eri's eyes glittered when she realized this exactly matched what she read in the book about the detention of monster hybrids underground, making her certain the matter was highly suspicious. Eri called her teacher in a firm tone, and with eyes glittering with determination, declared to him that a true meditator must be able to practice meditation in any environment no matter how difficult it is. She justified her strange request with her desire to undergo the meditation challenge at its extreme difficulty inside the secret underground laboratory, something that struck Martin with total shock, wondering about her desire to meditate in such a chaotic place. The child insisted enthusiastically on going down there, and the teacher was deeply moved by her amazing passion and felt ashamed of himself because he pre-assumed that she would target and give up the lessons quickly while she was putting in all this monumental effort. A deep sense of shame overcame Martin, and he recalled memories of his suffering and searching alone in the past without anyone sharing with him, to be certain that the reason for his not giving up his studies all that time was precisely for this moment in which he would teach Lady Eri the arts of meditation. Enthusiasm ignited in Teacher Martin's heart, and he promised Eri firmly that he would take care of the matter and would certainly obtain the necessary permit to enter the secret laboratory, for which the child thanked him with overwhelming joy. Martin asked her to wait for moments and hurried to bring the permit. In the meantime, the familiar expressed his concern and his bad feeling toward that laboratory, wondering if it was better for them to ask the Grand Duke's help to solve this problem, but Eri refused the idea completely, explaining that monster hybrids feel terror of human adults, and therefore they must go themselves. The child stood with features filled with resolve and determination, vowing to herself that her monster hybrid friends should wait for her, because she is coming to save them without a doubt. Meanwhile, somewhere inside the Magic Tower's basement, an iron door was opened violently for evil wizards to appear, ordering a group of trembling hybrid children in the corner of the dark room to come out. The hybrid children appeared in a miserable state, as their bodies were covered with bruises and wounds and covered with features of horror. And suddenly a cruel hand extended to grab the arm of one of the children firmly and injected something into his body, making him moan in pain. The rest of the children watched the scene with broken hearts, for one of them to wonder in despair if they were destined to get out of this hell one day, while another muttered curses expressing his helplessness and anger. The scene focused on a blue-haired hybrid child named Karhine, 7 years old, who began recalling his tragedy in silence, thinking how months had passed since his arrival at this place, and how his life had turned into a real hell since the moment the orphanage director discovered the truth of his being a hybrid. Karhine remembered bitterly how he was sold mercilessly in the slave market, and how he was stripped of his humanity to be forcibly pulled from one illegal exhibition to another, accompanied by other hybrids to be displayed as strange commodities. And when he was finally transferred to the massive magic tower, the poor child deluded himself into thinking his suffering had ended and his life would witness improvement at last. for he initially thought his role would be limited to helping in simple scientific research as they deluded him while they were taking his physical measurements. But the reality was hiding for him a cruelty he did not imagine. The wizards soon revealed their dark, true faces as they began looking at him and his like with contempt, wondering with cruel mockery if hybrid slaves are considered humans in the first place. The wizards watched Karhine with sick fascination, noticing how his body overflows with demonic energy, yet he manages to suppress it completely, which aroused their ugly scientific curiosity and prompted them to suggest subjecting him to cruel experiments. The wizards discussed the possibility of getting into trouble if the Tower Master discovered their actions, but they reassured themselves that no one cares what happens in this deep basement laboratory that no one visits, asserting that their secret is safe as long as the other wizards do not discover them. As soon as their horrific experiments began, Karhine's hybrid friends from whom he used to draw strength began falling and passing away one after another before him, making him wonder in pain if they were truly just monsters hiding under human skin. The wizards, with their eyes that glow with evil, continued stripping the children of their humanity, repeating to them that they are not human, and poured all their pent-up hatred and enmity toward monsters on them. In light of this cruelty, Karhine realized while clutching his stomach in extreme pain that there was no longer any place or person to turn to ask for help or survival. Karhine fell on the cold floor beside his exhausted companions, wondering in fatigue if this extreme pain was one of the side effects of the drug they were forced to take earlier. The child drowned in a whirlpool of never-ending pain, wondering bitterly how long he would have to endure this torment, certain that his suffering would continue as long as there was a breath echoing in his chest. Despite all that despair and the darkness surrounding him, Karhine turned with tearful eyes toward the closed door, pleading inside him for anyone to intervene, for in the depths of his broken heart, there was still a desperate desire to stay alive. The scene moves to Eri, standing with serious and surprised features, while Teacher Martin's voice echoed in the background, explaining to her that this is the secret laboratory belonging to the Tower Wizards. The scene inside the laboratory was chaotic and scary, as the wizards appeared in a miserable state with exhausted and semi-insane eyes, raving words about ongoing research, and one of them boasting with a hysterical laugh that he hadn't tasted sleep for hundreds of hours, while another fell into a deep sleep over his papers from the intensity of exhaustion. In another corner, two wizards were mixing chemicals in a boiling cauldron, laughing with intense obsession as they calculated the amounts with insane accuracy. For Eri to realize at that moment that thanks to her teacher Martin's help, she had finally managed to reach the Magic Tower basement. But what she saw of the wizards' madness and their shabby condition made her stand in a state of total amazement. Eri stood contemplating the chaotic scene in the Magic Tower basement and wondered in confusion how she was supposed to find her hybrid friends amidst all this massive chaos. This scene was interrupted by a violent crash sound and a desperate cry of one of the wizards. So Teacher Martin apologized to Eri for the chaos, explaining that everyone here had lost their senses due to their intense immersion in their research. Eri then remembered the words of the maids who described the wizards as eccentric, to realize that the Magic Tower basement was much more chaotic than she imagined. A strange fog filling the place caught her attention, so she pointed to it and asked her teacher about its nature, wondering in her secret if it was demonic energy. Teacher Martin explained to her in confusion that the wizards gathered here do not wash much, for the child to conclude with shock that this fog is nothing but accumulated steam from sweat. Her familiar was struck with total shock and shouted at those wizards to start washing, then fainted from the horror of the situation. She realized that her friend had fainted from the intensity of the filth and felt she became alone in her mission. And in the meantime, her teacher urged her to advance more into the interior. Martin told her he sent prior notification of her coming, and for this reason the place looks less chaotic than usual, which struck the child with a bigger shock, wondering how this could be the less chaotic version. Although Martin considered that meditation in this basement is almost impossible usually, he saw that the attempt might be worth attention on that day while Eri was wandering with her sight in the place. Eri felt difficulty in breathing, but she made a resolve to endure. She had to find her hybrid friends who were suffering quickly, and decided to start searching for the laboratory rooms. Eri asked her teacher about what she read in the Tower newspaper about the presence of friends helping in research here. Martin confirmed their presence, explaining they vary from different plants and animals to weak monsters, and even hybrid demi-humans are kept in the basement too. And when she inquired about their current place, intense interest appeared on her face. So Martin pointed to a set of far doors, explaining they must be in one of those rooms. But he added that there are dozens of similar rooms and that he is not sure of their exact place, especially since the rooms change their locations constantly through magic. Besides that, wizards do not care about anything but their own research. While she was Thinking, one of the wizards who resemble living dead collided with her and pushed her violently, asking her not to block the way because he is busy. The child wondered in confusion about what she should do. She wants to ask the other wizards, but she realized that even if she tried, those wizards who resemble living dead will never listen to her. The place was full of scattered belongings and piles of trash, and she even noticed writings on the walls insulting the Tower Master and cursing him, so she concluded that this is the worst environment ever, and that its inhabitants do not respect their elders. Martin cleared a small space amidst the chaos and invited her to sit and meditate, but Ari could no longer endure. This amount of chaos and filth was beyond the energy of a polite child like her, so she shouted that she cannot do anything here. Driven by her determination, she carried a cleaning brush and headed directly to the tower director's office to knock on his door. The director, named Sheik, welcomed her, explaining that the tower master is currently out of the office, and asked her what he could do for her. That horrific experience in the basement ignited a fire in the heart of Ari, the lover of cleanliness. So she explained to the director enthusiastically that cleaning is extremely necessary, and that if they do not cough from the dust, they can conduct more research. The director found she was wonderful and reminded him of his grandson, and saw that staying on good terms with the Ortigo family is in the tower's favor, so he decided to let her do what she wants for the time being. As a result of her strong insistence, the 5 commandments for a decent life, drafted by Ari Ortigo herself, were established the next day, and included cleaning the surroundings, washing well, not spitting on the floor, practicing exercise in the early morning, and getting treatment when ill. The wizards looked at the new list hung on the wall in wonder, wondering about the nature of these strange laws related to cleaning and exercises. Martin falsely told them that Director Sheik threatened to cut research funding if they did not wake up early and wash, and that anyone who pollutes common areas will get 0 funding. Horror struck the wizards from this threat, while Martin smiled to himself, believing that Ari's 5 commandments will help them focus better in meditation inside the tower. Teacher Martin felt extreme enthusiasm, and declared he couldn't sit idly by, and that he would help Lady Ari with all his might, then called the other wizards to start practicing sports exercises immediately. Indeed, thanks to the misunderstanding that occurred about cutting research funding, the Magic Tower Reform Project led by Ari gained great momentum. She was receiving everyone every morning with a bright smile and inviting them to clean the basement together. Initially, some wizards expressed their grumbling, wondering about the reason for wasting their time in cleaning while they are busy with their research. But with the passage of days, positive changes began to appear. They noticed that breathing became easier after installing new ventilation windows in the tower. It also became easier for them to find their research materials amidst the chaos that began to disappear, and they felt that their bodies became lighter and more active after they started practicing exercises and climbing stairs regularly. After about a week had passed, the wizards began realizing that this new pattern of life is very nice, and that the morning dizziness they were suffering from has completely disappeared, wondering if this is the decent life effect. The Magic Tower was changing slowly, and Director Sheik expressed his extreme admiration at the speed with which the tower changed thanks to Ari's presence. The change was occurring at a faster pace than Ari herself expected. After a few days, her cookie friend finally regained consciousness after the shock he was exposed to, and felt he could live again in this clean place. Finally, the basement laboratory cleaning process was about to end, and Ari stood before it, declaring that proudly, while her friend was impressed by how clean the place was that was drowning in filth. Some wizards approached Ari hesitantly, expressing their desire to thank her. The child was surprised by their kind gesture. One of them admitted he initially thought cleaning and practicing sports were just a waste of energy, but he noticed that his research performance has improved thanks to the 5 commandments. And another added that it became easier for him to focus now after the foul smell disappeared from the place. Everyone agreed with him, emphasizing that work has been going wonderfully recently, and that all credit for that goes to her. While they were expressing their sincere gratitude, Ari saw demonic energy leaking from their bodies, and got excited, declaring that the time has come to absorb all this energy. Thanks to the opening of the wizards' hearts, she managed to absorb enough energy to rotate her purification ring twice, thus successfully completing the Magic Tower purification process. After the basement became completely clean, all her focus became centered on her next goal. The time has finally come to find her monster hybrid friends detained behind that red door. For the hybrids imprisoned, every day that passed them behind the red door in the Magic Tower basement was a duplicate version of suffering, where wizards used to open the door once or twice daily to draw their blood or inject them with unknown substances. After that, they are returned to their desolate rooms again, and this vicious cycle of pain continues. But recently, they noticed that the atmosphere in the Magic Tower has become strange, for the wizards suddenly became obsessed with cleanliness and order, and were shouting at each other to clean the trash, and commented that the atmosphere has become turbulent due to the young lady's constant visits. As a result, the wizards responsible for the experiments decided that it is better to stop them for a few days. Although high-profile figures do not care about the hybrids' matter, they cannot allow anyone to see them in this filthy state. Inside the detention room, one of the girls heard the loud cleaning sounds outside and drew the others' attention to her hearing a child's voice. Outside, the wizards were telling Eri proudly that they are working hard and that they cleaned the area near that room on that day, mentioning she is the daughter of the Ortigo family. The hybrids heard this talk, and although they were happy with the stop of the experiments thanks to the young lady, they felt the bitterness of the injustice they live and how they are stuck in a place like this while the world outside is changing. With the passage of days, Eri's clear and life-filled voice continued to echo from outside their door. She was giving them greetings and encouraging them, saying they are working hard and they are the best. Karhine felt a strange sensation he hadn't experienced before. This voice he just heard was completely different. It was a pure child's voice. It did not resemble anything he had heard before, and it did not carry in its folds any feeling of deprivation or jealousy, but was something completely new that made him want to hear more. While he was listening to her way of talking and her laughs, he felt as if the pain wringing his heart in this cold place has eased a bit. After finishing her encouragement, Eri took a deep breath while looking toward that room, her next goal clearly determined. Teacher Martin expressed his extreme admiration for how clean and wonderful the place was after removing the chaos. But Eri pointed to a specific door and asked him curiously if this door was always there. The teacher confirmed the door's existence, so Eri told him she thinks she just heard a moaning sound coming from inside that room. A strange feeling of concern overcame her, and driven by her intuition, she asked her teacher Martin to open that door immediately. When the door opened, they caught a glimpse of a boy sitting alone inside, so Martin wondered with a quiet voice if there was anyone in the room, or if there was something wrong. Eri declared she will enter for a moment, and found the blue-haired boy sitting alone inside. Eri stared into his blue eyes that resemble a lake, and realized at that moment that she knows this boy. She had seen him before in the novel. He was Karhine, the character who stood at the forefront of the demi-monsters and led the attack on the magic tower, and famous for possessing massive abilities. Eri realized she finally found the room in which the demi-monsters were detained, while the boy was sitting on the floor, dazzled by the bright light he wasn't used to. She approached him and gave him a greeting, then announced to him with a smile that she came specifically to save him. The boy realized that this is the same voice he used to hear from outside the door, and that this child is its owner. The boy wondered why a figure who seems of high status would come to a place like this, which surprised Eri. Eri examined him up close and noticed with sorrow that his body is covered with painful wounds and scars, and that his feet are bound in chains. The child realized at that moment the reason for the hatred Karhine bore and his desire to destroy the North, and understood the extent of the difficulty he went through until now. In a tone filled with empathy, she asked him if he had been in a lot of pain. She stretched her small hand and held his hand gently, and offered him to go with her. The boy felt a sting in his heart from this unexpected gesture, and pulled his hand quickly, apologizing that it was dirty. Eri told him that doesn't matter at all, then hugged him tightly and promised him she will save him and they will get out of this place together. She held on to him with insistence and made a resolve in her heart that this time she will certainly save him. In Director Sheik's office, one of the assistants was presenting a report stating that since the application of the 5 commandments, research performance in the Magic Tower has significantly improved, and that the wizards who were collapsing from exhaustion every few days, not one of them fell for a whole week. The director expressed his surprise, admitting that the matter is truly unexpected and that the tower basement has become incredibly clean. And he acknowledged that he was skeptical initially, but now he is indebted in thanks to Lady Eri. At that moment, Eri entered the office and gave a greeting to Director Sheik, declaring she has something to tell him. But the director's shock was great when he saw a group of children standing behind her, so he asked her in awe about their identity. She answered him proudly that they are her demi-monster friends, which made the director remember that they indeed brought some demi-monster slaves in order to conduct experiments. But he soon noticed the miserable state of their bodies full of wounds and bruises, and wondered in confusion about the reason for their being in this state. Eri cried out loudly, explaining that this is what she came to talk about, and that these friends were being bullied in the basement. The director denounced the matter, considering it impossible, as he reviews all experiment reports himself, but Teacher Martin intervened to confirm that Lady Eri is right. He explained that while cleaning the basement, they discovered a secret laboratory and found inside it demi-monsters covering them wounds, and it appeared they were subjected to inhuman experiments. Eri declared that there must be a very bad wizard who lied in the reports, while the director stood shocked by the idea of something like this happening. With extreme anger, the director ordered the summoning of those responsible for those experiments immediately. The director faced the responsible wizard named Molding and asked him if he was the one who supervised the demi-monster experiments, and reminded him that he said it was just a simple training experiment. Then he pointed to the children whose bodies appeared bruised and wondered angrily how human experiments can be conducted until they are injured this way, demanding an explanation for what is happening on Earth. But Molding's companions contented themselves with whispering among themselves mockingly, considering that Molding had lost his senses. Wizard Molding exploded in anger, considering that entering another person's laboratory is a violation of the tower rules, and wondered how he was caught, then shouted that the matter is unfair and that he did nothing but run the slaves a little. Meanwhile, one of Director Sheik's assistants presented a set of documents, asking him to take a look at them. The assistant explained that these documents were found in the laboratory behind the red door Lady Eri mentioned, and it seems they are fake experiment reports they were presenting until now. Molding tried to defend himself, claiming it was a misunderstanding, but the director silenced him with extreme anger. The director was infuriated. After he allowed them to work without intervening in the tower experiments, they go and do something like this, and ordered immediately to shackle them. And while they were being led shackled in handcuffs, Eri shouted that they are bad people, and that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Once the full truth is revealed, these wizards will be imprisoned in the North Prison, known as the Exile of Evil Researchers. Eri commented that dealing with villains was very easy, and that it resembles the end of a trivial series that ends without any tension, but the director reassured her. And the director promised that as soon as he informs the Grand Duke of this matter, he will send these rascals to hell. Eri felt relief. Thanks to that, no one will have to suffer at the hands of these bad wizards anymore. While Karhine was looking at her silently, joy overwhelmed Eri, and she declared happily that she finally succeeded in saving her demi-monster friends. Thus, thanks to Eri's efforts, the Magic Tower experiment incident, which could have turned into a major catastrophe, was contained quickly. Later, Director Sheik presented Karhine with a box of medicines to treat his wounds and apologized to him sincerely, explaining that as the person in charge, he bears a great responsibility for this incident and that he is truly sorry for not noticing the matter and wished he could be forgiven. Karhine thought to himself that he doesn't have the energy to forgive anyone or feel anger now, and that the most important thing is what will happen to them after that. At that moment, Eri asked the director if they would be released now, and wondered if she could take her demi-monster friends with her, which raised the director's astonishment. She explained enthusiastically that she can even give them rooms to stay, and that she owns more than 1 million neon, and that she will bear responsibility and will get permission from the Grand Duke too, then asked him with concern if the matter was unacceptable. The director answered her that he doesn't see an objection, but suggested that instead of asking him, it might be better to ask them directly. He added that after being freed from their chains, they were no longer slaves. Eri turned toward the other children and stretched her hands to them with warmth, and invited them to come with her if they agree. The children looked at each other in confusion, wondering if Eri truly wants to take them with her. She told them with a bright smile that Castle Ortigo has many good things, and that the matter will be fun, certainly, and promised them she will teach them pumze and fencing. Then she announced to them that she wants to be friends. Thus, Eri Ortigo purified the Magic Tower, and even saved the demi-monsters too, and has received the completed mission data from Director Sheik on her map of the northern Castle Ortigo. The number of her friends she saved reached 5: Dinan, Rayred, Vels, Seor, and Karhine. She knew Karhine because he was the leader of the demi-monsters in the novel, but she wondered why the other friends' names also seemed familiar. While recalling the cover of the novel, The Monster of the Northern Snowfields, suddenly she remembered everything. They were all friends who would awaken incredibly strong supernatural abilities in the future, making her realize that she has formed some amazingly strong friends. In the novel, these friends used that massive power to take revenge on the Magic Tower, but she decided that the matter will be different this time. For if they stay in Castle Ortigo, she will be able to monitor them and help them, and to ensure that things won't go as in the book, she had to take good care of her friends. Upon their arrival at the castle, the children were awed by how wide the corridor was and how high the ceiling was, and everything seemed luxurious and expensive, and they wondered if this truly was the ghost castle they heard about. They were actually bright and life-filled children. Eri welcomed them with enthusiasm and promised them to introduce them to the place where they will stay from now on, and began by introducing them to their private rooms. Eri continued her introductory tour and took them to the luxurious dining room, explaining that this is the place where they eat the delicious food prepared by the top chefs. Then she enthusiastically led them to the spacious bathroom and told them they could become completely clean here. which struck the children with awe at the place's luxury. The children were awed by the level of luxury and wondered about this kind of indulgence, while Eri offered them a toothbrush and toothpaste and suggested they wash their teeth and faces together from now on, considering the matter would be fun. But Karhine tactfully refused the offer and thanked her for her kindness, emphasizing he can wash himself, then excused himself. Eri watched him as he left and wondered in herself about the reason for his action, while the other children were running happily around her exploring the luxurious room, and her familiar asked her about the reason for her sadness. Eri realized that Karhine never looked into her eyes since they met, and concluded that he must have gone through bad things in the past, and that it is natural for him to be cautious, and that the matter will take time for them to get close to each other. Despite that, she wished he would like the room she prepared for him. Karhine stood before his room door and felt strange. When he entered, he found himself in an incredibly luxurious and beautiful room, prepared specifically for him, and wondered in awe if this was truly his room. But he soon scolded himself, trying to question the matter, and wondered if he was truly allowed to use a room like this. He convinced himself he was just a monster, for how could he dare think of using a beautiful room, and expected they would soon be kicked out to a hut. Although he didn't know the reason for the young lady bringing them here, he couldn't give up his caution yet. He remembered the matter was similar when they first went to the magic tower, where the experiments began the moment he gave up his caution. But he recalled Eri's kind words as she asked him if he had been in a lot of pain, and her offer to him to go with her. He believed he would never be able to escape that laboratory. He used to believe his life was just waiting for death, but thanks to her, he managed to get out. And now, before he dies, he felt he had a debt of gratitude he must repay. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Castle Ortigo, one of the Duke's assistants was informing him of the completion of installing a magic shield around the place, and when the Duke asked him if this was all he had to report, the assistant hesitated. He told him that wizards from the Northern Magic Tower had arrived to install the shield, and they had brought with them the Magic Tower research funding report this time, delivering it on behalf of the Tower Master. The Duke's assistant was surprised by the wizard's action, who usually resembled living dead. They looked different this time, and described their appearance as scary. The Duke received the report, believing it was just research records carrying no importance. But he was surprised when he found that the report is essentially a story of how all Magic Tower problems were solved thanks to the kind and beautiful Eri. The Duke wondered in confusion what this praise publication was. At that moment, Eri ran toward him, calling him old man, declaring she was waiting for him. He told her he heard what happened in the Magic Tower, so she confirmed the news proudly, declaring she solved everything. The Duke was surprised that while he was away from the castle for a few days dealing with monsters, she turned into a hero in the Magic Tower. He scolded her for her reckless going to the underground laboratory and asked her why she didn't wait until his return. She justified her position that there was no time. The Duke scolded her because at such times she must summon an adult. She replied that this is what she did when she summoned Teacher Martin. The Duke wondered in himself about the reason for her eloquence and felt he needed to scold her somehow. So he decided that since the matter might be dangerous, from now on, she is forbidden from moving without telling anyone, and threatened her that if she acted alone again, he would make her eat a lot of broccoli, which children hate, and all kinds of disgusting vegetables. But she surprised him with an enthusiastic cry, declaring she loves broccoli, and added happily that her grandmother used to always boil it for her, and that it was extremely delicious, and concluded she must act alone a lot from now on to be able to eat it. The Duke realized he forgot that the child has her grandmother's tastes, and lost the will to scold her. The Duke announced his desire to go see the monster hybrids she had brought, so Eri strictly told him that they had committed no sin that warranted scolding, leading her father to agree not to scold them. She explained to him that she considers them human beings and friends of hers despite the way people look at them as monsters, pointing enthusiastically to her ability to rid them of any demonic energy they might carry. The Grand Duke smiled to himself, noticing that her talk about getting rid of demonic energy greatly resembled his mother's way of speaking. The Grand Duke praised his daughter, admitting that her correcting the Magic Tower's mistakes on her own was a difficult achievement that counts in her favor, wishing in his heart that he could tenderly pat her small head in such moments. Despite his hesitation to touch her, he praised her intelligence and wonderful work, causing signs of great surprise and happiness to be drawn on Eri's face for receiving this praise. After a series of events, the monster hybrids came under the Grand Duke's protection and were allowed to stay at Castle Ortigo. A few days passed, and Karhine appeared sitting anxiously before the Duke. The Grand Duke sat regally before him, pointing out that he was the monster hybrid brought by his daughter to the castle. Karhine looked at the Duke with tension, contemplating his overwhelming prestige that confirmed the rumors circulating about him, and wondered to himself with concern if the stage of harassment and torture was about to finally begin. The boy recalled in his mind the few days he had spent at the castle, noticing that no one had beaten him, or spat on him, or even drawn his blood as used to happen in the tower, which increased his bewilderment and fear that this meeting might be the beginning of a different kind of torture. The Grand Duke sat calmly addressing the boy by his name, hinting at the titles people call him as a monster hybrid. The boy answered in the affirmative, so the Duke noticed indifferently that he felt no demonic energy emitting from him, concluding that the prevailing belief about monster hybrids possessing evil energy is nothing but blind prejudice. Karheen agreed with him, while the Duke continued to contemplate him with piercing looks. The Duke noticed to himself that the boy's appearance does not differ from any ordinary human, but rather his features suggest he is a son of a noble family. The Duke revealed that he had listened to his story from Eri and asked him, fulfilling his daughter's wish, to try to reach an understanding and harmonize with her. Karheen was surprised by the request, inquiring about the intent, for the Duke to explain that he wants him to become a friend to Eri. Karheen completely misunderstood the request, recalling what he had heard about noble families who take children to be slaves who receive punishment on behalf of their children. So he agreed, surrendering to his expected role as a slave to the little lady. The Duke denounced his strange conclusion, pointing out that his way of speaking does not suit a 7-year-old child at all. The Duke clarified his understanding clearly, emphasizing that his daughter truly wishes to get close to him, and since he realizes they are not dangerous beings, the role of an ordinary friend, not a slave, is completely sufficient. The Duke strictly emphasized that there would be no kind of whipping or punishment, so the boy wondered in awe if what was truly required of him was to spend time with her as a natural friend. The Duke confirmed that, for Karheen to drown in confusion and wonder, not believing that merely being a friend justifies allowing him to live in this luxurious place. The scene moved to show the boy sitting later before a luxurious dining table, his mind still buzzing with questions about the true benefit desired from him. The children gathered around the table, where Eri announced with overwhelming joy her intention that they all eat large amounts of delicious food together, revealing that the main dish for the day was fish. The children expressed extreme admiration for the fish, and prepared to swallow it at once in a barbaric way that indicated their ignorance of table manners. Eri intervened quickly to prevent them, explaining, seriously, the necessity of removing the bones first before eating the fish to avoid any harm that might befall their throats. One of the boys tried to remove the bones with his bare hands simply, prompting Eri to let out a cry of panic at his random behavior. The child took a firm stance resembling strict grandmothers, and raised a fork and spoon to guide them to the necessity of using the designated cutlery beside their plates to avoid getting their hands dirty while eating. The boys stared at the forks in their hands with total confusion and wonder, showing their total ignorance of what these tools were and how to use them. Eri began teaching her friends how to use cutlery, brilliantly showing them how to cut the fish with a fork and knife, and praised Karheen's good performance when he began imitating her, encouraging him to continue practicing this way. Eri looked with empathy at her monster hybrid friends and noticed that their arms and legs were thin like fish bones, wishing in her heart that they would eat heartily to gain some weight and become full, recalling her grandmother's words that a cute child who eats well is a good child. An atmosphere of temporary calm pervaded the large dining table where everyone was trying to eat their meal, making Eri feel satisfied and pleased to see things going well. But this calm soon dissipated, as one of the girls expressed her extreme admiration for the delicious taste of the fish, using some inappropriate words to express how bad her previous life was compared to this bliss, while another wondered if he could eat the fish with his hands instead of the fork. The chaos increased when another boy began drinking tea directly from the pot, while another boy surrendered to sleep, placing his head on the dining table after announcing he had finished his meal. Eri realized then that she had overlooked an important matter, which was that the monster hybrids were focusing throughout their previous lives on survival only, making them completely ignorant of the simplest rules of general etiquette, leaving her standing shocked and identifying before the scene of massive chaos on the table. Eri tried to guide them gently, asking them to eat slowly, and alerting the sleeping boy that he shouldn't sleep in this narrow place not designated for that. Then she sighed in despair before the salad plate, realizing that it was natural for her friends not to know the rules of conduct since they had not received any education in this field before. She recalled at that moment her grandmother's advice, who always emphasized that learning etiquette and tact is a basic condition for a child to grow up wonderfully and perfectly. Karheen noticed Eri's confusion and clear annoyance, and thought with concern that they shouldn't cause the little lady any more annoyance. Karheen felt responsible and wondered to himself if he should intervene and guide the other children, but he feared that his intervention might be considered overstepping his bounds. Eri and Karheen sat in total confusion before this problem, as Eri was racking her brain in search of an appropriate solution to teach them and fix this situation. Suddenly, a genius idea lit up in Eri's mind when the words "basic etiquette" and etiquette education occurred to her. A sly smile was drawn on her face, and she laughed mischievously, declaring to herself that she had just reached an excellent idea to solve this problem. She caught her friend's attention with a wide smile while clapping her hands, and told them enthusiastically that she had found the perfect place they must go to together, which raised their confusion and questions about their new destination. She confirmed to them that they would all go together, and made a resolve to take them to the education hall located within the castle facilities. The education hall in Castle Ortigo was a huge and majestic building, built specifically to teach noble children from the main family and the side branches. This hall is a specialized educational institution in which various subjects are taught, including lessons in general etiquette and tact, in addition to sword fencing drills. Aerie immediately headed to Grand Duke Declan's office, and with all enthusiasm asked him for permission to allow her to attend classes in the education hall, accompanied by her new monster hybrid friends. The Grand Duke was surprised by her request, and warned her seriously that the education hall is considered a somewhat dangerous place. He explained to her that the place is ruled by the logic of power, based on the ideology of the family's first founder, and that even with her status as a noble lady, the mischievous children there would not treat her with respect. But Aerie reassured him confidently that it would be okay. In fact, Aerie had wanted to go to the education hall for a long time, recalling the previous confrontation in which she taught one of the bullying boys a harsh lesson. With eyes glittering with enthusiasm, she whispered to herself that it was a great opportunity to teach these bad children a lesson in morals while they were there. While the Duke was looking at her in wonder for not understanding her hidden intent, the Duke finally agreed to her request and promised to send word to the education hall, but he insisted on appointing knights to accompany them from behind to ensure their safety. Once permission was obtained, Aerie and her friends prepared perfectly, and soon their first day in class arrived, where they walked together in their elegant clothes toward the hall. One of the boys asked fearfully if the education hall was a place for whipping and punishment, for Aerie to gasp, shocked, and confirm to him, denying that fiercely, explaining that it is a place for learning etiquette together. One of the girls expressed her admiration for the idea of learning, but she let out a vulgar word because of her tension, for Aerie to interrupt her firmly and prevent her from swearing, so the girl apologized, justifying that it was just a habit. Aerie breathed a sigh of relief, admitting to herself that she felt some tension too. It had been a long time since she attended classes, but she felt nostalgia and happiness at the thought that she would receive moral education again with everyone, exactly as used to happen in the Taekwondo training hall in her previous life. Her familiar friend told her that this was her first visit to the education hall since she gave that boy Schultz a sound beating. The child Aerie announced enthusiastically that she was ready, for the time had finally come for the great hero to go punish the education hall. Inside the education hall, the children were whispering about the rumors stating that the new student who had joined them was extremely weak, wondering dismissively if she was truly of the one-star category. Although one of them pointed out that she was the one who taught Schultz a lesson, another boy belittled this act, considering there was nothing impressive in overcoming a weak person like Schultz who was expelled, and that the newcomer would not be anything special. Their talk was interrupted by the etiquette teacher, Fiona, who asked everyone to remain silent, announcing that the lesson would begin shortly. But the red-haired boy showed his grumbling clearly, declaring he only cares about fencing lessons, and suggested the teacher end the etiquette lesson early because it was painful and boring. Teacher Fiona sighed in despair, wondering to herself about the way she should deal with these mischievous children. At that moment, Aerie entered, giving a greeting with a loud voice, then introduced herself as the 5-year-old Aerie, and that she had recently joined this class, expressing her hope to learn with the friends beside her, and she kindly asked them to take care of her, which raised the astonishment of some students. She continued her talk explaining that she hopes to form many friendships while studying with them, and that she will eventually purify the education hall of demonic energy. Then she turned to a group of children standing beside her, and introduced them proudly as her friends from the Magic Tower, and mentioned their names. Teacher Fiona expressed extreme admiration for Aerie's exquisite manners and welcomed her warmly. But suddenly she was interrupted by the boy Morgan, son of one of the Knight families, who wondered angrily and indignantly how she dared to call these hybrids monsters as her friends, and added sharply that it was inconceivable that they should have to take lessons with these creatures. The rest of the students agreed with him, expressing their disgust at the thought of studying with slaves, and claiming that these hybrids emit demonic energy. Upon hearing these insults, Aerie shouted in their faces that they were all disrespectful, and scolded them firmly, emphasizing that monster hybrids do not emit any demonic energy, and that this is just bad prejudice. She added that her friends might be hybrids, but they possess abilities, and that the Grand Duke himself had said that the education hall values ability above bloodlines. She cited the will of the first family head, which states that any strong person can receive lessons in the education hall, and asked them challengingly if she was wrong, making them fall silent, unable to respond. Teacher Fiona looked at the situation in awe, admiring the little lady's ability to control the children with her logical words even before she intervened, and concluded that she might be much smarter than she had thought. Then the teacher decided to end the introduction segment and suggested they all learn etiquette together through a short test. Ari agreed with extreme enthusiasm, which raised her classmates' wonder. She was wondering to herself with enthusiasm about the nature of etiquette education in this hall, hoping it would be extremely difficult so she could learn more. After moments, the teacher posed the first test, asking them what they should do if they saw an old man carrying heavy luggage. The options presented were attack him, or steal his luggage, or carry the luggage for him, for one of the students to shout that the correct answer is the first, while another shouted that the correct answer is the second, leaving Ari in a state of shock, wondering if this was a real question. One of the students complained about the difficulty of the question, but her classmate considered it very easy, justifying her choice to steal the luggage by the possibility of there being a treasure inside. Another student agreed with her, but insisted that the first answer is the most correct. The old man might be a monster in disguise, so he must be beaten first to see his reaction, while Karhine confirmed that the correct answer must be to attack him, because the matter would turn into a major catastrophe if he was a monster. Ari looked at her classmates in a state of horror, and realized that if they continued with this thinking, the world was destined for destruction. When the teacher asked if there were any other opinions, Ari raised her hand enthusiastically, declaring she had a different opinion. Morgan noticed her answer and frowned, then threw a paper in her direction, but her friend Karhine skillfully intercepted it. Her familiar friend felt extreme resentment. The atmosphere in the hall was in a state of massive chaos. Ari realized she wouldn't be able to focus on the lesson this way, so she decided to ask the teacher to stop the test for a moment. And with eyes glittering with determination, she announced she would like to say something to her classmates. Morgan wondered mockingly about who messes around during class, then admitted he was the perpetrator and asked insolently what she could do about it. Then he challenged her directly, asking her to ignore the teacher whom he described as a scarecrow, and to fight him. But she answered him with total calm, reminding him they were in lesson time currently, which raised his surprise. She continued her talk gently, asking him to focus on the lesson so as not to put the teacher in a difficult position. Teacher Fiona rejoiced at her intervention and asked everyone to focus, while Morgan was feeling embarrassment and anger for her ignoring him. Then Ari announced she would answer the test, and presented the correct answer, which is that one must help the old man in carrying his luggage. Thus, the test ended with a crushing victory for Ari, who obtained first place, while no other student answered correctly, which made her think that what she did was just common sense, while the rest of the students wondered in surprise about the reason for the correctness of her answer. And the teacher was impressed by her being the first student to ever answer correctly. During the break time, Morgan approached Ari and Karhine and described them as the monster and the tiny one. So Ari defended her friend, emphasizing that he is not a monster. Morgan accused her of ignoring him earlier, then presented himself arrogantly as the strongest in this class. Ari asked him calmly what he wants, so he challenged her to a fight, provided that the loser becomes a follower to the winner. Morgan was thinking of his resentment at others, ignoring him for being from a side branch of the family, and saw in Ari a ripe opportunity to prove himself. If he could subdue her, things would become fun. He remembered the covenant everyone swears upon entering the education hall, which states that anyone who moves conflicts from inside the hall to outside it will be hit by the curse of the first Grand Duke. So he concluded from that he wouldn't be exposed to any punishment, even if he assaulted her inside the hall. Morgan rejoiced. The next class is the combat class, which is a perfect timing, and thought that even if she screamed from fear in the training courtyard, no one would help her, and he would be able to hit her as he pleases. Ari looked at him to herself, considering him more cowardly than she had thought. She had seen his like among spoiled children in her previous life. She remembered how she used to make them kneel with her techniques, and realized that if she left a boy like him alone, he might cause a big problem in the future. So she accepted his challenge, declaring that the time has come to establish discipline once again. In the training courtyard, the combat instructor, Garen, was thinking that he had been told of the arrival of the little lady from the Ortigo family today. He remembered that teacher Fiona had praised her intelligence, but he assumed that since she was the Duke's youngest daughter who grew up in the South, she might be good at etiquette, but she would face difficulty in keeping up with combat drills. When he arrived, he was surprised to see the children sitting in total calm unusually. Then he noticed Ari and Morgan standing in confrontation with each other with serious looks. He asked the children what was happening, so one of the girls pointed to him to be quiet and told him the two were about to exchange blows. The instructor was surprised, realizing that those who will fight are Morgan and the little lady. Although it is common for the children of the North to play at fighting, he decided to intervene if the matter became violent. The two stood in confrontation with each other on their first day, and the instructor decided to stop them immediately if things went bad. Morgan explained the rules are simple. The loser is the one who falls first. So Ari agreed, but asked they start by bowing to each other first. Morgan was angry at this request and demanded they start immediately, but she told him calmly she wouldn't fight him if he continued in this behavior, making him retreat and insist they agreed on fighting. Ari scolded him, asking him not to get angry, and explaining that there are things in this world that won't go his way, and insisted that if he wanted to fight, he must bow. So Morgan succumbed to the matter reluctantly while wondering in confusion about the reason for her insistence on this strange matter. Ari continued teaching her opponent combat etiquette, explaining that after bowing, they must shake hands with each other, then bow politely to the watching friends, and finally present a word of thanks to parents, and that the duel does not start except after all that, which struck Morgan with extreme shock. After moments, Morgan had completed all those rituals and stood panting from exhaustion after thanking his mother, declaring he had done everything. Ari announced that the fight would start now, while Morgan was thinking with resolve that the time has finally come to teach this little girl a lesson. Ari let out a strong battle cry and took the preparation stance for the battle. Morgan was surprised by the strength of her voice, wondering if this was a sonic attack, and decided to end the matter quickly. Morgan rushed toward her, planning to attack her legs and knock her to the ground, but Ari dodged his attack with a swift and fast move. Morgan was shocked when he found she had appeared behind him suddenly, and screamed in a state of panic and wonder. Ari jumped in the air, realizing that despite Morgan's speed, her basics, which she honed with daily training, were superior. Ari executed her distinctive secret technique, the flying vital strike, to hit Morgan with a direct blow that made him scream in pain. The combat instructor and the rest of the children watched the scene in a state of awe. Her attack was deep, mysterious, and incomprehensible to them. Her friend Karhine looked at her with wide eyes, realizing this was a move unprecedented in the North. Morgan fell to the ground reeling from the strength of the blow. Ari stood with arms crossed, declaring victory was hers. Morgan did not believe he lost, and threatened her that he would tell his mother, to which she replied mockingly that all spoiled children say the same thing and described him as a snitch. Morgan was infuriated by her description of him, but she faced him firmly, emphasizing that complaining after a fair duel makes him a snitch, and that fighting in the academy stays in the academy. This is the rule. Instructor Garen was completely shocked and wondered about the nature of that kick, emphasizing that such a technique does not exist in Northern martial arts. He was impressed by her fluid and graceful move and concluded she was a true master. The instructor approached Ari and praised her amazing strength and asked her if she had trained in martial arts. So she was surprised by his presence but confirmed to him enthusiastically she trained hard. The instructor was awed that the child known as a purifier of the lowest degree is in fact a hidden martial arts master. The instructor laughed, emphasizing that teacher Fiona was right. Ari is truly amazing, and that things will be fun from now on. Then thanked her, while Morgan was still in pain on the ground. Ari approached Morgan and stretched her hand to him, and said since he won't snitch on her, he fought hard too, which raised his confusion. She explained to him that her master used to always say that duels must end with respect, then forgave him for his previous insolence, and asked him not to act badly again. Morgan held her hand hesitantly, and at that moment, two of the boys felt their hearts thumping. They were impressed by the small smile that didn't leave her face during her fight, and by the glitter of her eyes as she attacked. Karhine thought he already knew Lady Ari was amazing, but she was very wonderful, and wished he could be like her, and rushed forward without hesitation. He wondered if he would be able to repay his debt if he became stronger than he is now. He made a resolve to become strong like Lady Ari, and began thinking about what he must do to achieve that. And with her crushing victory in her duel, Ari succeeded in straightening the children's behavior. Ari smiled to herself, realizing that now she would be able to focus on her lessons, and that she would be able to get closer to her friends more. The first step in purifying the Academy's dark energy had begun to go on its way quietly, even without Ari realizing it. For the first rule of the Ortigo Academy stated that strength is the absolute truth. For this reason, it was natural in the North for children to be attracted to the strongest person, and after Ari proved her superiority, her classmates began looking at her with great admiration. For one day, a mysterious new student named Ari Ortigo appeared. and on her first day, she managed to defeat Morgan, who was considered the #1 student in the class. In addition to her strength, her calm nerves and mature stance were more than enough to arouse the other children's interest. Soon, rumors about her began to spread throughout the academy, while she was walking accompanied by her hybrid friends and everyone was watching her. It wasn't long before some students began to imitate her and took to giving each other the polite morning greeting she was accustomed to. Indeed, one of them approached her calling her by the title Miss #1 and asked her about the etiquette test paper, specifically about a question related to whether it was right to chase a cat in the street and bully it. Ari explained to him enthusiastically that one must never bully cats, but must only watch them and think about how cute they are, which impressed the student. Then the rest of the students gathered around her, and one of the girls asked her about the phrase that must be said before eating meals. So Ari answered her that she must say, "I will eat well," very politely. Another student asked her, remembering she told them not to eat with their hands, if this meant they shouldn't eat soup with their hands too. So she confirmed to him that soup is eaten with a spoon. Some students felt exhausted, considering that being human is very difficult and that there is a lot to learn in the etiquette class, so they decided they would study later. Ari encouraged them, emphasizing the matter is not difficult and that she will explain everything to them again, one by one. She was thinking to herself that their mere asking of questions counts as a big progress, but she was surprised that they forget 10 things for every one thing she teaches them, as their test papers were showing low grades. She noticed that the children seem interested in etiquette, but they struggle a lot to learn it, and wondered if something was missing her. Then she suddenly realized that the dark energy in the north specifically affects children's minds and concluded she needs to purify that energy first. She decided to try that immediately, so she sat in the meditation position, but she didn't succeed and felt confusion. After a while, she woke her familiar friend who resembles a cookie. The familiar grumbled that he was planning to sleep during the academy time because of the noise, but Ari apologized and told him she has a request, which is that she wants to devour a group of dark energy. The familiar simply told her to do that, but she explained she already tried. But the children run very violently that it's difficult to purify anything, for the dark energy appeared as if it continues to escape. She told him she wants to pull all the dark energy at once, so the familiar reminded her there is nothing that calls for difficulty, and that she only has to use that thing she learned recently. It was a perfect timing to use the power of purification meditation, which is the ability to pull the dark energy all at once. Ari understood the matter and announced she will use it immediately and set off running. Meanwhile, Morgan was watching her from afar. After his loss of the duel, his pride was completely shattered, but the matter went beyond that. He was feeling jealous of others and wanted to stand beside Ari too, and to truly know what she did to gain all that strength. Since that duel, he has been feeling a strange feeling, and when he saw Ari alone, he considered it his opportunity. So he decided to present her with the warrior's tonic, that is coffee, as a gift, then ask her for a rematch. But before he could approach, Karhain stopped him. Morgan mocked him, describing him as a half-blood monster. But Karhain faced him, pointing out that he had been following her and staring at Lady Ari from behind since the duel. Morgan was confused and thought to himself that Karhain is the person he cannot stand seeing beside Ari because of his weak ability and low status, then shouted in Karhain's face, ordering him to stay away, declaring that the place beside Ari belongs to him, for he is the second strongest person in the place. Karhain decided to use his ability to control Morgan, as he directed his energy toward him and forced his body to move against his will, thinking to himself that to become like Lady Ari, he must keep his eyes on her all the time and stay close to her, and to keep away any rival who might constitute a threat to her. Morgan was surprised by his body moving on its own without his will, while Karhain continued to impose his control over him. And Karhain directed a sharp look at Morgan, warning him against merely thinking of harming Lady Ari, then ordered him to get rid of the dangerous liquid he carries, prompting Morgan to drop the coffee bottle against his will, while he wonders in confusion about the reason for that since it is just coffee. And finally, Karhain ordered him to obey everything Lady Ari says from now on, for Morgan to stand in a state of awe and confusion, unable to understand. Suddenly, Morgan regained consciousness and looked around confusedly, wondering what he was doing in this place, while Karhain stood watching him calmly. Karhain thought to himself that what he just used was just a weak brainwashing that affects slightly the subconscious, and concluded that this level of influence will be more than enough for someone like Morgan. But Karhain soon held his head in pain, realizing that this severe headache is one of the side effects of his manipulating others' memory. And Karhain recalled the nature of his ability that recently awakened, which is a power capable of distorting place and memories, and remembered how he was sitting alone in the darkness, thinking that he never planned to use it because it doesn't serve any purpose with adults or strong opponents, and he used to believe that even if he used it, nothing would change in his bitter reality. But he looked at his hand and tightened his grip with resolve, realizing that despite his energy's weakness and his inability to control it completely yet, it will be very useful if he wants to become stronger to repay his debt to Lady Airy. The scene moved to the education hall where the teacher began the lesson, and the students answered her with noticeable enthusiasm and discipline. Teacher Fiona was surprised by the students' intense focus and attention to her, and even their using of respect titles unusually. Meanwhile, Airy was sitting calmly, realizing that her decision to use purification meditation was the ideal solution, and noticed with happiness that as soon as she purified all the dark energy from her friends, her purification indicator rose significantly, while an atmosphere of discipline pervaded the hall. And Airy confirmed her theory. Once the dark energy disappeared, everyone became able to focus better, which appeared clearly when Morgan raised his hand enthusiastically to participate. The teacher asked Morgan if his vision had become clearer now, so he answered her in the affirmative, although his classmates mocked him and described him as the madman with clear eyes, so Morgan asked them for silence. Joy overwhelmed Airy's heart for her success in purifying the worst troublemakers like Morgan, considering that an amazing result. Airy noticed the big positive change that occurred to the rest of the Academy's children, but what truly pleased her was seeing passion shining in Carhine's eyes during his study, after they were filling with darkness in the past. She also felt very proud to see the rest of the hybrid children studying with diligence and hard work, imagining them as small buds growing and flourishing thanks to her efforts. At the end of the day, Teacher Fiona distributed weekly notices to students, stressing the necessity of delivering them to their families. It was known that the savage northern children might seem at first glance neglected by adults, but that was in fact a traditional educational style to help them survive in the harsh northern environment, where every family exerts great effort in teaching its sons. For this reason, the observation class mentioned in the notice was considered one of the most important events in the academy, which made Airy look at the paper with deep thought. After several days had passed, Airy knocked on Teacher Fiona's office door and entered, greeting her and explaining that she came based on her request. The teacher welcomed her and reminded her that tomorrow is the observation class day. Then the teacher added wonderingly that she hadn't received any reply, clarifying whether Grand Duke Declan would attend or not, which made Airy flinch with tension, and the teacher asked her if she had delivered the notice to him. The teacher smiled, explaining that most parents will attend this time, and it would be very wonderful if the Grand Duke could attend too. Airy got confused and began rubbing her hands with tension, then told the teacher with a hesitant voice that the Grand Duke is extremely busy, and it's likely he won't come. The teacher was surprised by her reply, but Airy hurried to excuse herself and run toward the door, confirming to her with tension that she doesn't mind at all even if the Duke doesn't attend for her sake. Airy walked thinking of her lie to the teacher, where she admitted to herself that she never told the Grand Duke about the observation class, and the reason for that was that she didn't want to disturb him, and remembered how she was imagining his harsh reaction if she asked him to attend, expecting him to grumble about the many requests of hers and tell her that he's busy and that she must ask her grandmother to go instead of him. Airy shook her head, trying to drive away these ideas, justifying to herself that she didn't hide telling him out of fear of his refusal, but because the Grand Duke is the one who protects the castle and he's extremely busy, and has no time to attend an event like the observation class. Her familiar friend asked her if she truly was satisfied with this decision, so she answered him with an eye closure and surrender that she was, and concluded in her heart that she shouldn't stand as an obstacle in his way or increase his burdens. The next day, the observation class time arrived, where parents gathered in the academy and features of surprise and wonder appeared on them. The parents exchanged conversations, where one of them concluded from the full attendance of everyone that they had noticed the matter too, for the other to confirm to him that this change was clear and couldn't be missed. And one of the fathers expressed with intense emotion to his wife his urgent desire to know what happened to their child exactly. For the first time, all families attended the observation class, and the reason behind that was simple. Adults in every home recently faced unbelievable situations related to their children. For the parents noticed a radical change, where one of them recalled how his lazy son, who lies carelessly, had become coming out to receive him with politeness and respect upon his return home, thanking him for his hard work. Another mother mentioned she was surprised to see her little girl arranging her room herself, while another father was shocked upon seeing his son immersed in reading a book, and another family wondered at their daughter's sharing of her food with others, something that wasn't familiar to them at all. The children changed thanks to Airy's influence on them, and for Northern parents, seeing a well-behaved child was an experience they passed through for the first time in their lives, and one of the fathers smiled with overwhelming happiness while acknowledging that something had certainly happened to cause this positive change. Teacher Fiona stood before the parents gathered in the hall and announced to the students the arrival of their families. The parents were enthusiastic to discover the reason for this noticeable change in their children, while Eri sat at her desk and looked behind her with faint hope, wishing for the Duke's attendance. But she soon lowered her head in sadness when she heard her classmates calling out to their families. Meanwhile, in the meeting room at Castle Ortigo, the Grand Duke was sitting alone on an empty table, wondering in surprise at the disappearance of everyone. His assistant answered him calmly that everyone is on vacation, which increased the Grand Duke's confusion. The Duke looked at the pile of accumulated papers, grumbling to himself at having to deal with them alone, and wondered about the reason that drives everyone to take vacation at the same time. The assistant browsed through some papers looking for an answer, to tell the Duke that they have all gone to the academy. The assistant explained that the academy is holding an observation class for parents today, and asked the Duke in wonder if Lady Eri hadn't told him about this matter. Signs of surprise were drawn on the Grand Duke's face, and he echoed with awe his assistant's words about the observation class for parents.